That makes
But it's okay. I don't mind re-saying it. Um, hey, what's going on, guys? Doing another debate in ANCAP. Um, I think I'm gonna change the room to debate in ANCAP because nobody's joined.
Oh yeah.
KingSithis is now live streaming
Wait,
World
what did
of
the room?
Warcraft, debate Ancaps.
Oh, okay. Oh, text. Okay. I didn't even notice that was the name.
Okay, so we are live. I got the debate ANCAPs. Very good. Oh, what I was going to say was the one thing that definitely flipped a switch for me was like what kind of flipped a switch was like the whole idea that like aggression, we believe in the non-aggression principle, but we're making an
Mhm.
exception for the state, or like okay, it's
Yeah.
why are we making this exception for the state? And I kept trying to
Yeah.
argue with myself about like why we're making this exception, and every argument I felt like failed or fell on its face. So I kind of,
Yeah.
that was what kind of was the turning point a little bit for me, realizing that I wasn't being very consistent, with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember like when I was like thinking about like very like minimal, very limited government. I don't really know exactly like. Well, I think what it was like this idea where I'm like, okay, I don't really like the government. I don't like a lot of things the government does. But I, for some reason, like think that we still need the government to provide certain essential functions. So it's sort of like the minarchist line of thinking. And I don't know exactly what it was that led me to that position. I think it was just the idea that like to have any sort of stability, perhaps you need government,
Mm-hmm.
and without government, I'm like, I don't think I understood like, well, how could you really like perhaps enforce the law and have these certain like what we call like essential services. And
Yeah.
then after thinking about that, I I remember like I just thought about it more. I learned some more,
I
and
used to
then I
think that
kind of
ANCAP was kind of like a joke ideology. I didn't think it was serious. Like I didn't think anyone actually believed it.
mm,
Um, until I saw like the Liquid Zulu videos and then the other YouTube channels that were also ANCAPed. And when I really listened to their arguments, I'm like, wow, this is actually like a lot more comprehensive than I had assumed. You know what I'm saying?
mm. Yeah, yeah.
Um, like it has a lot more answers to questions than I thought. Like there was a lot of like arguments that like so for instance like with the rights enforcement agencies and how all of these how this could work privately, how that could work privately, like all of these explanations of how this could work privately, how that could work privately. I mean, a lot of this
Hmm.
shit was really thought through with a lot of these guys,
Hmm.
these economists, and I was actually pretty impressed about how well thought through it actually was. It wasn't just like, oh, we should just privatize it. It was just like, okay, well, we should privatize it, and here's how it could like theoretically work, and here are some examples in the real world where it's worked, and yeah, you know what I mean?
KingSithis would you like many viewers?
Yeah,
Let's make you pop.
that was
Yeah.
definitely like interesting to me.
I don't remember like what I remember. I don't remember one. Like I remember seeing Liquid Zulu's channel. Like it was probably a long. Well, I say a long time ago. Maybe like for some reason a couple years ago or something. And then like when I started thinking about this stuff more a few months ago, I watched a lot of his. I mostly watched a lot of his debates, and then I it was a lot of topics he covered. But it sort of all typically tied back into like anarcho-capitalism or just like capitalism. And then through watching those, because at first I was like skeptical, so I'm kind of watching and I'm thinking like, yeah, I don't really agree, like, because I knew vaguely like his position that he was an ANCAP, and so I'm watching and like there were certain things like I think I remember disagreeing with like IP for a while, and then I don't know, I don't remember exactly what it was, but then after a point I did realize like, okay, I think the NAP is correct. I think aggression is bad. I think people have rights. And then I concluded like, okay, like taxation's bad, and the state is like funded by taxation. That's basically what the state is. It's this coercive authority that takes. So I kind of I have to oppose that, or else I'm just kind of a
I
lot.
agree
Like I'm
with the
kind of
NAP 100%. My only thing is that, like, I'm not really the only thing that I'm not convinced about, not that I'm saying these guys are wrong, but the only thing that I'm not 100% convinced about is whether or not the NAP is true in terms of, like, it is a something that you could prove. I'm
like
not sure.
like the whole natural law approach.
Yeah, like,
Yeah, I don't really agree. I remember like when I learned about like natural law, I was like, I thought I agreed, like, because I agree with the NAP, but then I realized like, oh wait, natural law is like this idea that like law is something that's objectively true and like found like through reason, but it like exists in nature like objectively. I don't really agree with that.
yeah, I feel like I agree with the non-aggression principle, but a lot of people will say, like, I'm not a real libertarian or Ancap or not a true Ancap because I don't say the NAP is 100% true, or I say that I subjectively believe in the NAP, like it's my subjective beliefs that that's what I say.
Yeah.
But that's just true. You know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna sit here and like try to argue argumentation ethics when I don't even know if I agree with it myself. My problem with argumentation ethics is there are arguments against it that I don't even know how to argue against because I don't understand it enough. You know what I'm saying?
Argument, like, do you understand like the basic idea at least of argumentation ethics?
Yeah,
The
I
basic
understand the basic arguments, but
yeah.
like there's like these super complex questions that these people ask, right? When it comes to argumentation ethics that I don't really have an answer for, right? And I feel like you know what? I'm just gonna leave that to people who care about that. You know?
My issue with AE is like I remember watching Liquid Zulu. Like I don't know if he still is, but at some point like he was a proponent of it and he would argue about it sometimes. And when I see people argue for it, and like when I've thought about argumentation ethics, it all to me like the most basic way to put it is it kind of just points out that like if you say argue in favor of aggression, and you are arguing, which is a nonviolent thing, you're basically a hypocrite. But like that's kind of all it tells you. Like I don't. That doesn't make like that doesn't like the whole idea is that like it's a performative contradiction, which I agree, but that doesn't really tell you whether the claims in favor of aggression are true.
Also, it doesn't really
true or
convince
false.
people. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't convince
Yeah,
people at all.
it gets way too abstract and like
Yeah,
it's kind of weird.
because to get into like, okay, so like, it's not. I don't think it's enough to just say, "Oh, well, my beliefs are objective and yours is not." Like, you have to, like that. I don't think that really convinces anyone. It didn't convince me. What convinced me was the arguments for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, when I talk about the NAP, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, well, I'm objectively correct and you're objectively false. And here's why. I'm just going to be like, well, I believe in the NAP. And here's why not believing in the NAP is like kind of fucked up. You know what I'm saying? And, here's the ramifications of not supporting the NAP, right? Which would entail like violating people's rights, harming them, et cetera, right? And then we nibble about that. And I think that's way more convincing than being like, oh, well, it's objective. Why is it objective? Oh, well, because you're arguing and then you're in a performative contradiction. Blah, 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 blah. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong, right? Because I don't really know whether they're right or wrong. You know what I mean? I would like to assume that they're correct because I support the NAP and I would hope they're correct. You know what I mean? But I don't know if that really convinces anyone that much. I feel like you have to already agree with it.
It's kind of like the issue also, from what I remember when I learned about argumentation ethics, is that like when you're arguing, when you're talking about it, you kind of have to like, I think it's justified, but then you kind of have to go into this whole like justification for the idea that like if you are arguing, you necessarily like hold libertarian property rights in ethics to be true, because that's what it rests on. It's resting on this idea that if you argue, you are taking the NAP. You are taking the NAP to be true, basically because you are not engaging in violence by arguing because it is necessarily peaceful. But like not everyone accepts that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like gets complicated with that.
100%.
And
Yeah.
I find it to be equivalent to like if you're arguing with a murderer and like you're like murder and like they say like murder is bad or something and you're like, oh well, you murdered someone. Because it's like, oh well, you're arguing and argumentation is peaceful, therefore like performative contradiction. It's like, okay, like that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, he's just gonna kill you anyways. And like, I get the thing. Like, now the one thing is just like, okay, yeah, like I said, it's not really gonna convince anybody. Like, if you're gonna convince somebody not to murder you, right? Like you said, you're saying, oh well, being objectively correct. I'm just objectively correct. You're in a performative contradiction. I mean, you may be correct. And if you believe in your if I believe in the argumentation ethics, right? But what you call it? The thing is, you're not going to convince that murderer. Generally, how you would convince a murderer not to murder you is by giving them some reasoning or not to murder you, or you know, maybe they're just so insane that like you just can't convince them because they're just so insane. You know what I mean? So I kind of like David Friedman's approach, and a lot of people don't really like David Friedman that are Ancaps, but I kind of like David Friedman because, and I look at David Friedman kind of like the same way I look at what you call it, Thomas Sowell, right? You know, I don't agree with him on everything. He's a minarchist, right? But they make such good arguments that I like them a lot because of it. You know what I mean? Thomas Sowell makes really, really good arguments, and David Friedman makes really good arguments for ANCAP. So, like, when I talk to people about anarcho-capitalism, and they'd be like, oh, well, what's going to happen when we get rid of the state? You know, well, my arguments are going to be, oh, well, we're going to have rights enforcement agencies and this and this and that and blah, 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 blah. And here's how we can replace the function as the state. You know, I feel like that's a better way to convince people than just being like, oh, well, I'm just objectively correct and you're objectively wrong. Right. You know? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because the whole thing with I haven't like read you know, I haven't read David Friedman. From what I know about him, he takes a more practical approach. Like instead of being obsessed, like you know, many ANCAP or libertarians kind of focus on like the NAP as this inviolable principle, and they focus on the ethics. But from what I know, Friedman is more focused on like the practical consequences of ANCAP.
Yeah, he 100%. He more focuses on like, how could we make this work in the real world? How could a private company, you know, take over the industry of law, right? And things like that. And he makes a lot of really, really good arguments for it. And he makes a lot of good free market arguments. But the thing is that a lot of ANCAPs disagree with him on is that he doesn't believe in the NAP. And he also
doesn't hold it to be like
he doesn't hold it absolutely like we do, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, he gives a situation where let's say there's a group of people and there's a gunman coming in and they're about to shoot a whole bunch of people, and then somebody has a gun on the floor left nearby, but they expressly forbid anyone from touching that gun. Do you grab the gun anyway to save everyone's life? He says that he would grab the gun. Like, you know what I'm saying? Even though it violates people's rights to save all those people. So he says he doesn't follow the NAP absolutely. Like, there are some situations where he would violate the NAP, or he believes everyone would. Now, I don't agree with him on that. I wouldn't grab the gun because obviously I support the NAP. But the thing is, that's why a lot of ANCAPs don't really like him, because he doesn't follow the NAP. And also, a big reason why a lot of ANCAPs don't like him is because he's not an Austrian. He's a Chicago school economist. And Chicago school economists are minarchists. You know what I mean? They're not. They're more minarchist. Yeah. His father was not an anarchist. He was very free market guy, but he did believe in the state, and he did believe in you know, I mean, he was a lot more free market in comparison to like other people, right? But in comparison to us, he was not free market. You know what I'm saying? He was a
Yeah.
status, you know, even though he was much less so than like other people. Um, so yeah, a lot of Chicago schools, although there are some Chicago schools that are Ancaps, like they got Brian Chaplin, but they believe in certain things that us Austrians don't agree with. So, for instance, they believe in disutility curves and things like that, and they believe in udals.
In
Uh,
what?
Udals, like you.
Udal.
Okay, so basically, okay, so you know how like we rank our I forgot what's the word. It's ordinal, I think.
Yeah, or ordinal, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not like there's no objective value. It's
Yeah,
like
so we rank
success.
things based like I like my vape and then I like my this and then I like my that. It's not like I like this 30% more, I like this 50% more, I like this 40% more, right?
Yeah, it's just like I like A more than B, I like B more than C, blah blah blah.
Yeah. So he believes in that like you can calculate utility.
Oh.
I forgot what his argument was.
Who believes this?
David Friedman and Chicago School economists.
Okay.
And a lot of Keynesians too. They believe in the, like counting. I mean, the thing is, they don't necessarily believe that a udal is necessarily a actual thing that they're counting, but it's more just like a. How do I explain it? Like now, there are some people that actually legitimately believe in udals, which is like a shorter word of utility calculation, which is like, oh, I like this 30% more, 1% more, 50% more. So they use like these certain sort of tests. I forgot what the tests entail, but they use these weird tests to try to like calculate, oh, this person likes this 30% more, 10% more, or, you know, 100% more, this percent more. But the problem, you know, with those is that it's because udals, like it's not actually like a measurement. It's not something you can actually measure, because you can't actually see how much of a percentage somebody likes something. All you could do is like measure it a degree. I don't really know how they do it. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically they believe in udals and we do not.
Okay.
Let me ask ChatGPT.
Good idea.
Yeah.
You too. Oh, it's like a yeah.
How do economists calculate udals? Okay, so it's basically economists don't actually calculate udals. That's a key insight of modern economists, Austrian economists. What a udal is supposed to be? The term udal is invented by early neoclassical economists like yada 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 to refer to a hypothetical unit of utility or measurable happiness / value. The idea that if we could assign numbers to how much satisfaction someone gets to food goods, we could like mathematically model of behaviors like ice cream gives 10 udals, pizza gives me 7. I'm reading the chat GPT.
Yeah.
So Austrian view. Okay, so so instead of calculating udals, economists use utility functions, symbolic representing perspective. This doesn't mean that udals are literally measured. It's the convenient ways to models choose mathematics. Like these functions are ordinal. Any transformation that preserves the ranking, like taking logs, represents the same preferences.
Okay.
But it's not telling me how they measure it.
It sounds like you'd have to like assign like arbitrary values to say goods, and then like consumer likes.
How do economists calculate udals?
However many
Hypothetically. Let's see. To set up assigning numbers to let's suppose a person who consumes a good X and Y says apples and oranges say apples and oranges, economists assume there's a utility function u, x, y that assumes a number is vary to every combination of goods. These numbers are not measured in real life. They are assigned purely for modeling convenience. They, like economists, describe preferences mathematically. Marginal utility, they find marginal. If an economist wants to make a model of quantitative utility, let's say an arbitrary util number, numbers to make comparison, for example, eating one slice equals 10. Soda. They could then calculate total utility customer surplus by. But, and this is critical, those numbers are entirely hypothetical and they're chosen. I guess it's basically like they ask people how much they try to like ask people like how to, I guess, how they rank things. And then they try to put a number on it. And then
they're assigning these hypothetical numbers.
And then off of that, they would be like, oh, like the utility of doing X. Yeah. So it's basically all hypothetical. There's like no real way to do it, basically.
Or it's like, it's purely for like, it sounds like they do that to like create graphs or whatever. Huh. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird because I think it's kind of strange to like assign.
I wish I had somebody who believed in how utils worked, so they can maybe explain it to me. Because I feel like ChatGPT is leaving something out. I don't know. But I don't care. Okay, mainstream welfare economists sometimes assume interpersonal comparatives of utility. If we tax a dollar and give to a policy that the total utility increases, that only works if we assume that $1 gives to B more utils than it costs A, again, the total hypothetical. So in reality, utils aren't observable or comparable. Okay, so it's not like actual like numbers. It's just like they're kind of just like assuming the degree based on like how people rank things.
I think so.
Interesting. Oh shit, William, how are you, man?
I'm good. How are you?
What do you think about utils?
When you guys were talking about like, calculating utility, interpersonal utility comparisons are very hard to do. I think you can make general statements, like for example, like taking a couple dollars from Bill Gates and giving it, like say like $200 from Bill Gates and giving it to a poor person is probably going to drastically cause more utility than it will take away. But in general, it's pretty hard to like make those kind of comparisons. Like there's some things like so obviously like worse than other things. Like for example, being in like horrible agony, dying of brain cancer is a lot worse than like say losing $20. But like in general, you can compare that across people in general. But you have a very limited ability to do it, so that can create like problems. It'd be better to, if anything, you can maybe make argument. Yeah.
Are you saying like, oh, like in the extremes, it's a little bit easier to make the calculations, but in like normal hypothetical situations, it's a lot harder because like you can't like just compare like utils like you can, like a temperature or something like that.
So like if I ask people how much they value like a piece of property, try to figure out which person values it more. Well, there's an inherent problem of essentially people might lie and say they value it more than they actually do because they want to have it right in the other person. And B, even if we rule that one out, how do you actually know how much they value it? That would be like a huge problem. Whereas, for example, like, if the option is like, oh, you lose your phone and lose, versus like, dying in agony of brain cancers. You still can't exactly calculate, but you can pretty obviously take a good guess that yes, that's probably going to hurt you a heck of a lot more than losing your phone. Most you can get a general concept of that, but yeah, but you're not going to give it can't give you an exact calculation, like exactly how much utils or whatever you want to call it are caused by getting brain cancer. You can say, yeah, it's generally pretty severe for most people, and yeah.
Oh,
you
so
can
I could
how
give an
painful it is.
example. Like, for instance, like stealing $1 from a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
Taking that, giving it to like a normal person or a poor person, like that would like obviously in that situation, like that billionaire losing that $1 is not as big a deal, but it's more of a bigger deal to the poor person to have it, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's the
but
law of marginal utility, but yeah.
but let's say, yeah. But let's say like there's a situation where you have a middle class person, and then you take that $1 and then you give it to a slightly less rich, better off middle class person. How do you then compare that utility, right? Well, it's not
Pretty hard.
it's not as easy because it's not an extreme example, right? So, yeah, like it's not always that. Yeah, I get what you're saying. You know what? You get what I'm saying, right? Or
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Exactly. I think I make sense. It'd be like if someone's like saying like, oh, like, you can't know that saving someone's life is gonna be better than, like, for example, not getting your shoes wet. I'm like, okay, that'd be like some very, very, very rare situation where someone has like so much psychological distress over getting their shoes wet that compared to like any other person, and the other individual might care about their life less than the average person does, or be less uncomfortable or afraid of drowning. But in general, like, it's gonna be really hard for that not to like be the case that like one is more harmful than others. But there are gonna be, but in general, yeah, you can. I would generally recommend avoiding just like too much utility calculators. If you want,
Yeah, because
like,
we're
talk
talking
about,
about we're talking about David Friedman.
yeah,
And
a little bit there.
I know the Chicago school, they believe in utils to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about. All right, new guys, what's going on? Fangisador, what's going on, bro?
How you doing, man?
So, what do you think about Ancaps? Do you know anything about it, or?
Oh yeah, I know plenty about it. I used to be one many years ago. Not too big of a fan of the idea now after I've grown up a little bit. I'm mainly just here to listen and learn, but you guys want my input, I'd be happy to give some input.
I guess to keep the conversation going, do you have any like criticisms you maybe want to levy or anything like that, or?
I mean, how would society stay coherent in a anarcho-capitalist model?
I guess it depends on what you mean by like coherent. Like, what do you mean?
Like, I understand, like, in the anarchist school of thought, you guys differentiate government from governance. So how would a governance system work without like an official state?
Oh, okay. I get what you're asking. So
Yeah.
So basically, you know, there's a lot of like, I mean, there's like a lot of couple of economists that have some pretty good lectures on the topic. David Friedman has a pretty good lectures. There's this one book called A Spontaneous Order, and then there's this one YouTube video I can send you that also goes deeper into it. But I could just give you the basic, explainer. So essentially how it works is that we would have some sort of private security agencies, competing private security agencies within within an area, let's say, Florida or something like that. And people would take a portion of their income and subscribe, those who want protection from these agencies, they would then subscribe to
What's good?
a private security agency of their choice. What's good? And that private security agency, if somebody were to say rob them or harm them, they would basically pay them restitution and then go and catch the person and charge that person and get restitution from that person to pay to that person. And it would work very similar to how car insurance works, but it would basically insure all of your property, including your body. Like if somebody crashes into your car, it's their fault. They pay you. You crash into them, you pay them. And the insurance kind of works out the details. They would have And that's kind of how it would work.
So what maintains harmony in this whole situation if you have like multiple competing I'll say violent organizations that are, tasked with defending people's property and people's lives? Like what would prevent them from, say, feuding with each other?
Well, profit would incentivize them to not want to get into fights.
If you want kick followers, join my Discord.
Fighting is a very expensive thing. It costs money. You have to get that money by charging the people who are paying for your services, by charging them higher premiums. And that will then incentivize people to not want to buy your service because they could just go to someone who's not charging, you to go pay for a war. So let's say one goes to war with another. What would end up happening is they would have to, because in this situation, it wouldn't be a state forcing people to pay into their system. It would be a private company. So in order to keep their customers and the money flowing, they have to give them the best service in comparison to the other competitors. So if they go to war, that's going to cost a lot of money, and they're going to have to charge more for their goods and services to the people who are buying them. And the people are going to see, oh man, my insurance premiums are going really high. And if they have the option to move to another one that's less violent and doesn't charge high insurance premiums, well, then they're going to be incentivized to do so, because the one that doesn't go to war and just instead goes to arbitration, they're going to charge more, whereas the one that doesn't go to war is going to charge less. I'm sorry, I might have said that backwards, but I'm sure you know what I mean.
Yeah, I understand.
So it's kind of like water seeking its own level, in the sense that the more violent you are, the more expensive it becomes, and the more disincentivized you are to engage in that activity, because the idea is that you want to make profit. Businesses want to minimize waste. And that's why insurance companies, even when people have two separate insurance companies in terms of like car insurance and things like that, when another person goes into a car accident, they're not just going to take the side of the person who's on theirs, who's under their insurance company. They're going to have to stay unbiased and look at the evidence. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, what would be the incentive to maintain public infrastructure, such as, to an acceptable and safe level? Because I'm not sure if you heard. What's up?
Sorry, it's kind of like you're sneaking in public infrastructure in there. I don't know. Maybe you just mean like when you say public infrastructure, like what do you mean?
I know you guys don't like to hear this, but my roads also.
Okay. Yeah.
What about the roads? Go ahead, you can say
No,
it.
it would be private infrastructure. It would be private companies maintaining the roads and sewage systems and whatnot. That's the basic answer. I mean, we can go more into it, but
recently there was a situation in the United Kingdom where some of their water treatment or something related to, water, the private company that was responsible for that was found dumping, I don't know, like waste or whatever off the coast of the United Kingdom. So knowing that private companies, their main goal is to maximize profit and minimize expenses, what would be the incentive to maintain the environment and to a acceptable level as a private company? Or even just public infrastructure like more roads?
Well,
okay.
You go ahead, Cameron. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. I think you're kind of gonna see it. I mean, because off the coast of the United Kingdom, like, is that the territory of the UK, or like what is that area?
I'm gonna look up this story real quick. I just heard it in a YouTube video earlier. I'm just gonna look more into
Sure.
it. Actually,
Can I give an answer on the roads?
Okay.
I just want to give a quick answer on the roads. You could just do it very similar to how like toll roads do it. So what toll roads do is they basically buy like long strips of land and then they just charge people to enter it, you know, or they, they could maybe, as opposed to like charging people to enter it, they could put like billboards on the side and then have like advertisements and then charge to put the advertisements there, they could maybe have like stores on the side that like get charged rent, and then like a portion of that money goes to uphold the road, and there are some other ways too, but I think I made my point on that one. Does that make sense, Fang?
I mean, yeah, but at the same time, let's say there's 100 companies that are responsible or have stake in the road infrastructure, and say, I don't know, the modern state of New Jersey. I'd say there would be there already is, but inconsistent road development issues would be even heightened, as well as some places charging exorbitant toll prices, which New Jersey already has, by the way. But with a private company, there's really no limit to the amount of tolls that they could levy against people. I think that
there definitely would be a limit. That would be limited by market forces. Like if you start charging and also let's keep in mind in an Ancap society, like if you had that in New Jersey, like you mentioned, there would be all sorts of, like you said, competing companies that construct and maintain roads. I think that gives them each large incentives to try and be better than their competitors, and in some cases to lower rates, even if that would help them.
Yeah.
In terms of their profits. And then also, the idea that like some road that some road that some company owns, it has high demand. A lot of people want to go on it, so then they start charging like, I don't know, some like crazy price, like thousands of dollars to use this road. Realistically, people are not going to use that road, and then the company will kind of be forced to, by the market, lower its prices pretty significantly.
Yeah, also, there wouldn't be anything legally stopping another person from opening another road next door in order to meet the demand. If somebody's charging a lot, as long as there's nothing like legally stopping another company from coming in and, also providing that same service, people will, if you have two options in front of you and one is charging a lot and the other one's charging a little and they're giving you the same thing, you're gonna choose the one that charges less. So that, nothing's gonna force them to pay more, but like I said, like we said, like Cameron said, we have market forces. You know what I mean? In the sense that if you do charge too much, well, then nobody's really gonna want to buy your thing, and then you're gonna go out of business. So that's kind of like how market forces work.
In my opinion, right, or to my level of understanding, that mainly applies to non-necessary services like, I don't know, video games or television sets, or like discretionary spending. Roads are kind of the backbone of an economy, and the way it wouldn't be a state in this situation, but society functions. And certain roads indirectly, contribute to the overall network. Like, say, I don't know, at a high demand tunnel, right? Like, whichever company is responsible for that high demand tunnel, saying leading into a central business district that a lot of commuters use, is going to get far more traffic than, a highway in the middle of nowhere. So, based on market forces, it's going to force a lot of more people into, crowded, dense environments where, the price of living may be higher, and, they may not be able to afford it, and the whole system just kind of collapses in on itself. And the point of a state is to kind of even a lot of that stuff out. And when you leave it up to markets, oftentimes what happens is these market forces tend to form conglomerates where you get trust issues. And when I mean trust, I mean like, what the state would currently levy antitrust legislation against, like a bunch of large corporations forming
Monopolies?
essentially, yeah, monopolies.
Well, us libertarians, or at least, and those who believe in the Austrian school, we don't really believe that there's such thing as a natural monopoly. Monopolies only occur through state intervention, whether it be regulation or laws, licensing laws, or zoning laws, minimum wages, all of those, or high taxes on tariffs, things like that. Those are things that the state puts in place that makes it harder for people to compete with each other, and then creates a situation where the only businesses that are able to compete in that market are those who have the excess capital to take on those regulatory burdens. That then creates a situation where there are less companies within a certain industry than there would be otherwise had the regulation not been there in the first place. So in a freer market, you would expect less monopolies and less companies to be as large as they are now, because there would be nothing stopping another company from coming in and competing with them. So for instance, if you look at, say, the medical industry within the United States, it tends to have the most monopolies. And the reason why it has the most monopolies is because it is the most regulated industry out there. I don't know any other industry that's more regulated than the medical industry. But the consequence of that is that there's a ton of monopolies. The reason why is because there's only a very few amount of companies who are able to pay for that, all those regulations and licensings and things like that. So that leaves very few companies left to compete with each other in the market. There's also patents too. They make it extremely expensive to get a doctor license. They make it illegal for doctors from other countries to practice medicine, their craft in America. They have to go through their licensing again. These are all barriers that make things more expensive and create more monopolies than there would be otherwise.
I mean, with good reason, because you don't want, medical malpractice. I mean, it's already a really big issue in the United States. But, I wouldn't want some random guy from the street becoming a doctor and saying, hey, I'm going to take care of your operation. I mean, these things exist for a reason. And I'm sure there's double reasons behind it. It's not always to protect you. I think people lie. Specifically, the state lies and says, oh, it's for your own safety. But, I mean, for something like that, I'd rather leave that up to the government to decide, like, requiring a medical license to practice medicine.
Here's the issue, though. Whenever the state...
Wait, can I respond to that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think it's not really, like, something super substantial, but I just want to say, like, you seem to simultaneously believe that the state is untrustworthy in certain regards, but then you also are trusting the state with this very delicate matter. I think that's a bit odd.
I mean, yeah, because the state has access to resources and, people who are experts in, checking compliances and experts in these fields. I don't fully trust the state. I'm not, a full-on statist. I'm not in favor of that shit, but I do recognize that there's still some things that the state does to, a pretty good degree in, having certain standards that, the free market should act within. So
here's the consequences, though. the consequences of regulations is the increase of prices and costs on the businesses that those regulations are being imposed upon. That then creates a higher cost and barrier to entry within that market, creating less of a demand that will be able to respond to less of a supply that will be able to respond to the demand, creating higher prices. Also, if I want to hire a doctor that is unlicensed, that should be my choice. Whereas if you put a regulation that says that it's illegal for somebody to look at you that is unlicensed or doesn't have the blessing of the state, well, then you're basically you'll be in prison. You can go to jail or face fines. And I think that's completely immoral. If I choose to take a pill that might have a chance of harming me, but also might have a chance of helping me, and I understand the risks and nobody's committing fraud in that transaction, then I should have the right to do so. But when you put regulations in place, you stop people from being allowed to make that choice.
Interesting. I mean, most people, right, especially if there's like a situation where somebody's rushed to the hospital, they're not really thinking like, oh, they don't have the time or the ability to think like, oh, is this doctor, licensed? Let me look into him. Oh shit, there's no national database of, I don't know, people who are licensed or unlicensed that I could refer to. Or there is, and it's just fake.
Well, you can have accreditations, right? Agencies. So what you would expect is unlicensed hospitals to be incentivized to pay accrediting agencies to look over their craft to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then they will give them their rating. And if those companies don't follow that rating, well, then they don't get their badge. They don't get their blessing. And if people see that, then people will be disincentivized to buy their services. Those companies who follow the standards that your average crediting agency would set, they get their badge of honor. And then because people see that, oh well, this guy is looked over by this very reputable accrediting agency, well then I could count on that accrediting agency, so therefore I could count on this doctor. And they're putting their own reputation on the line, because if they're wrong, well then no one's going to believe that accrediting agency, and then and another competitor will come in and take the spot. It's very similar to have you ever seen the show Pawn Stars?
Yeah.
So you know how when they go to the pawn place and they'd be like, hey, I have this item, and they'd be like, I don't really know anything about this item. Let me get my friend to come and look at it. Let me get my pal to look at it, right? And they call these private guys, right? And they have them basically take a look at it. And sometimes they have these accrediting agencies basically to look at the rareness of, say, like it's a coin. They have accrediting agencies for coins to test your coin, to see if it's authentic, to see if it's in good condition, and then they'll grade it based on that. And if you get a good grade, then, even though you're paying them money to do it, you're getting more money, because with that grade, people now are confident that your product is authentic. And this is all privately done. I could see this also applying to the medical industry.
Have you ever had an emergency medical incident by any chance?
Not recently.
Right. So there's already, the last thing that you want to do if you have an emergency medical incident, right, is have to file through a bunch of, which you already do. I'm not saying you don't have to, but, having to check the credibility, especially if, say it's a dire emergency of whoever is going to operate on you. Like, it's just inefficient. And for the sake of, free markets, I guess I don't think anybody would necessarily want to do that. especially when not everybody has the know-how to complete that. Like, I understand the whole.
But you could make that. I feel you could make that argument about any good or service on the market. Most people don't have the know-how and don't want to go through the rigmarole of buying their own car. So what I believe is the state should come in and have regulations that force everyone to have some sort of standardized car, so that people don't have to worry about making their own decisions. Whereas I think, yeah, sometimes allowing people to make their own decisions comes with risks and hardship, but that's the cost that you have to pay for being free.
I mean, that's why we have experts, and why these experts are, checked by the government for compliance reasons. That's why we have a whole risk and compliance industry, to make sure that these companies are working within some sort of standard. Because if there are no set standards, then people will, or when I mean people, I mean these companies responsible for, say, healthcare or roads or, buildings or any of these other things, can pretty much just do whatever they want. And as we've seen within recent years, companies are really just trying to cut costs at the expense of really everybody else, or the quality of their product. So, not everybody is an expert in, healthcare or engineering or any of these things, which is why there's people who are specialized in these industries who are go through compliance training and are meant to work within certain standards, so that they're practicing it safely and beneficially to the rest of society.
I don't disagree that we should have standards. My issue is that I don't believe the state should be the one to set the standard. I think it should be each individual should set their own standard. If you don't want to go to a certain hospital that you feel is sketchy, well, then you don't have to go there. If you don't want to go to this store that you feel doesn't selling good services, you don't have to go there. But if the state comes in and sets a standard, then they make it illegal for anyone to sell a service below their arbitrary standard. And you're basically allowing other people to set this standard for you. And I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want that.
Like, if I go to a hospital, right, and there's no sense of compliance, they've undergone no compliance, they've undergone really nothing.
Well,
there's no licensing involved. They could literally put anything in their syringe. And I'm not a medical person. That's not my field of specialty. So I'm not going to have the know-how, and the average person, for that matter of fact, or not even the average person, I'd say 99.4% of the population is not going to know what's in, that medication or whatever service that they're giving me at the hospital, or medicine or treatment. That could be a serious issue.
No, I understand your frustration, but again, you're assuming that there would be there's zero way to hold people responsible for their actions without a state. Whereas I'm saying there is. You have accrediting agencies that could set standards. You have restitution agencies that could hold people responsible for fraud or malpractice that leads to the death of another person. The only difference is that the standards and the restitution is not being set by a state. It's being set by competing private companies. So, yeah, and they're not doing it through force. It's doing it through some sort of consensual transaction that is agreed to by both sides. Whereas I think it's a little bit interesting for a lot of people to complain about what could be a potential situation of exploitation, but have zero to say about the literal exploitation that the state does. The worst a private company can do to me is refuse me their service, whereas the state can literally come in and force me to pay for their services regardless of whether I want it or not.
I mean, the worst a private company can do is say, I don't know. It depends on the company that it is, right? So for something that's discretionary, like a TV, the worst that can happen is your TV like goes out after, I don't know, however X amount of weeks, and it said it's going to go out after X amount of years, and it just essentially, it was not true. Which you could send it back, of course, um, but what about like the food industry? Like, there's state agencies that are responsible for checking whether certain restaurants or food distribution places are up to a certain standard so that the average person can stay healthy. And that goes the same for, like I said before, hospitals and roads and, things that the public uses. So the average person, again, is not an expert on, food, or chemistry, or medicine, or the specific mixture that roads use, or say cars. So
Yeah, but I just
we
don't think you
shouldn't
need. Oh, sorry, I
expect.
thought you were done.
Oh no, I was just saying we shouldn't expect the average person to do their own research on matters that they're not experts in.
Yeah, but I feel you could say that about any good or service, right? But I don't think you need to be an expert on every single thing in order to make a decision. As long as you are the one that bears the consequence of that decision, I think you should be allowed to make that decision. No, I don't expect people to be experts on everything, but I do think that people know what's best for them as opposed to some bureaucrat. So I think it's best to leave their people's choices to them so that they could bear the consequences of their actions, as opposed to having somebody at the top forcefully impose their will upon everyone and set some standard arbitrarily that everyone has to follow, regardless of whether you want it or don't.
Can I interject here?
Sure.
How would like a compromise situation? Like the government sets like general standards for like say like essential for like services that are like often like very high risk or like high like things where you kind of need to really immediately make decisions, or just in general, or specifically high risk services. They insist upon like classifying them as like whether or not they meet like the standards they set, and then if people want to buy from like say people who want to like give medicine without a license, they just have to be told these people don't have a license, and what they're gonna do. Maybe have like stronger or lesser standards of informed consent written in the law. I think that would potentially be an option that would work.
Incorrect, from my perspective. And the reason why that is because you are the owner of your body. So if the state were to come in and tell you that you're choosing something that is below our arbitrarily set standard, and engaging in that action does not initiate force against another innocent person, well then that would be a rights violation on the part of the state, because I have the right to put anything I want in my body for any reason.
I didn't say anything about you being punished for putting things in your body. I'm saying like if people, for example, are offering like medical care to you, right? If they don't follow the practice the government or whatever the company is.
But what if I'm okay? What if I'm okay with the
finish.
state not? What if I'm okay with them not following what the government says?
Then as long as you're informed of that, you can make that decision.
Okay, so then
But
it seems you're in
so what
agreement
I
with
was
me. Then
suggesting-
why have regulation? Why force anyone?
Because the average person doesn't want that.
Yeah, but if you don't want that, you don't have to choose that.
But the average person isn't going to fully know, and that's why.
Yeah, but I don't care what the
gentleman is
average
saying
person thinks. If the average person thought it's okay to rob me of everything that I own, butt naked, and then leave me stranded in the middle of the road to get my and then individually take all of my stuff and give it to a whole bunch of poor people in Africa to save them from death or whatever, that wouldn't make it okay.
Sure. And what I was saying is, I think the point is more like, for example, if you're making medical decisions, you need to really like make sure you don't have time to figure out, because you're in an emergency situation. You don't have time to figure out which company was best. Maybe you weren't able to do so, or maybe you just aren't good at researching. You can at least know if you can know, okay, the government has said this group is okay. I can choose if I want to not to go to a group that the government hasn't said it's okay, but I want to have that knowledge there, just that way I can like essentially have a more safe, or if I think it's more safe, I can do that. That would be kind of like the idea, rather than, for example, like having the government ban people who have like different kinds of medical practices. There just needs to be proper. It's kind of like a way to like guarantee informed consent. Would be kind of like a way to. The government also would have to figure out how like.
Well, no, because
the
then you would be
continuance there.
violating consent if individuals are okay with what the people are doing. That doesn't go with the standard that the state sets.
How would their consent be violated?
Because if I want to buy something from a company that doesn't follow the state standards, I'll get in trouble, or they'll get in trouble.
No, you won't. Did you listen to what I said?
What is the point of the state?
Then what's the point of the regulation
I don't really
if it's
see
not enforced?
Why it would need to, like, Sithis' solution that he was talking about earlier, with when it comes to say trying to make sure that companies are reputable, was accrediting agencies, and I think that serves essentially the same function that you're saying the state would serve.
Also, there's you could just in situations where you are in an emergency, as opposed to waiting until the emergency comes and then having somebody choose for you, you could just somebody maybe could create a service that you state to them which hospitals you feel are the best, that are that you would consent to going to. In the case of you getting into an accident, and then if an ambulance company comes in, they can maybe have like a database where they could look at, oh, this person is on this database and they consent to going to these hospitals if in case of this emergency. Okay, well then we'll send him to that hospital, and he doesn't have to do all that. He could just do it beforehand. I'm sure some private company could sell that service and create some sort of database and sell that as a service, right?
I think that's all the problem.
See, the thing is, right, you got to look at it like from a, so you got to think about it like this. You have an issue with them, like, you kind of have to think of some way, before we automatically think, let's get the government involved. We have to exhaust our options in the market. We have to see what way can we do this in which we're not necessarily violating another person's rights. And if we've exhausted every single one of those options, then okay, I would support the state. But I don't think you can. I think in most or every situation, you could find some sort of market solution. I'm confident of that.
I mean, I agree, but I don't think the market solution will be necessarily beneficiary to humanity as a whole. At the end of the day, markets forces are looking out for their interests and their profits and mitigating
Well, that's good.
cost.
Not bad to look out for profits. Profits.
Yeah, I would completely. Sorry, go ahead.
Profit means efficiency. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, adding on to what you just said, free markets are the single thing that gets people out of poverty. The reason why that is because free markets increase productivity, and increasing productivity is the thing that gets people out of poverty. It's an increase of productivity within a land is the thing that is accounted for to getting everybody out of poverty. It isn't the state. It is an increase in productivity. And how you get increases of productivity is through private property, respect for private property, and having an open market where people are able to trade their goods and services.
I mean, the problem is, like I said before, the government, maintains a certain set of standards to ensure that, these services are safe, and free markets have a habit of, in their goal of increasing profits, and it's not just about increasing profits, but it's also, lowering costs for them, and maybe not the average consumer, at the expense of whoever may be consuming it. And, a lot of consumers, and that could put ignorant consumers at risks and potentially the rest of society at risk, which is why these, I fully believe that the free market has its place in society. Though I think certain things should be handled by the government to ensure, uh, uniformity in, safety compliance. Because once violations happen, there's really nothing that's going to prevent it from happening again. And one of the biggest fears that a lot of these companies have are getting sued. And if there's no, public court system that holds these companies accountable and they're just accountable to the rest of the market, the rest of the market's going to look at it and say, hey, this could put us in trouble too. So we're just going to sweep this under the rug, as we've seen before. So, yeah, that's a pretty big concern.
I get your concern, but profit is good. It incentivizes people to give the best served product for the lowest price. Because if not, then people can choose to go and buy somewhere else. So when you're talking about private companies, and also in an anarchist market, a free market, you're making the assumption that there's going to be nothing that's going to hold businesses to any standard, and businesses will just be able to go around and do whatever they want without any negative consequence. But that's not how that works. If a business who is getting money from people who are purchasing their goods and services willingly in a free market, if they sell things for too high, well, then people are not going to want to buy their stuff and go to somewhere else. And if they sell something that isn't really good or high quality, well, then again, they'll do the same thing for that other reason. And that's what separates the private company and a free market from, say, the state. The state, it's a monopoly. You have no choice but to follow it. And they force you to pay them whether they give you a good service or not. I could completely dislike the services that the state's giving me, and they will force me to pay regardless of whether I want it or don't. If a private company in the free market violates my rights enforcement agency will take them to court and force them to pay me restitution. So in order to avoid that, they will do everything they can to not do something like that, because violating people's rights in a free market costs more than it helps them.
So what gives the court, for example, authority over, say, that private company? Because again, the biggest concern of a private company, is getting, depending on what it is, of course, like healthcare, for example, their biggest fear is getting involved in some legal issue. And that fear protects their quote unquote consumers or their patients from medical malpractice. And if
you can have something similar to that in a free market.
So what would have the authority that a court does in our modern
rights enforcement agencies or insurance firms that take on the responsibility of protecting people's property would take that on. And what they would do is they would hire private security in order to back them up in the case of somebody regaling on their agreements that the third-party arbitrator has set.
So you're saying that the rights enforcement agency will essentially take the role of the state involved in respects to...
it would do the things that the state does, but it would not be a state. It would be a private company that offers the same services as the state, but it would be done privately in the sense that, like, I'm purchasing their service of protection as opposed to the state taxing me to pay for it.
See, that was one of the main issues that I had with anarcho-capitalism when I was an anarcho-capitalist. Essentially, a private company taking the role of a de facto state and essentially becoming a de facto state.
Well, here's
But
the
only
difference.
becomes a de facto state if it starts.
Go ahead. You wanted to?
You think that would happen? Or, like, is that what your concern is? Like, is the concern that, like, these companies would effectively begin acting as a state sometimes?
Essentially becoming a de facto state is what I'm saying.
Well, again, the difference would be that there would be competition in the market, competing firms within a single area, as opposed to having one monopolistic force taking over a whole area. You would have multiple different private security agencies in a single area that you could choose to pay into, and the competition is what keeps it from going haywire. It would now. I'm not saying that it's impossible for a private security agency to do things that would violate people's rights or maybe try to become a state. But I would say it's it's less likely than it would be under a statist system, and the reason why is under a free market it's very costly to go to war, to fight, to get the means to defend, to take over another firm. And also I would expect in a mature market that a lot of these firms would have signed agreements with each other to protect each other if one goes haywire. So even if they have a lot of arms and weapons and money, if they take over another one and they have a bunch of agreements with a bunch of other ones, kind of like, a United Nations situation, you know what I mean? They would have all the backup of all those other companies to dump out that one that decides to try to become a state. So in a mature market like that, with assigned agreements ahead of time, kind of like how they do with insurance agencies in the car insurance industry, I would say it would be much less likely to happen.
So what exactly is stopping, say, because I understand the mantra that the state has a monopoly on violence, right?
Yes.
What stops this conglomerate of, private insurance security agencies from forming a conglomerate and essentially taking the role of the state and, enforcing its will on average people? Because, by the way, rights aren't actually real in the sense that a lot of libertarians say they are. They're essentially privileges granted by whatever constitution you're under, depending on what country you live in. So there's nothing really stopping me from violating somebody else's rights if there's no, central arbiter, which is the state. In our current, social situation would be the state.
Well, I would say it would be less likely to happen, and the reason why is because there would be, in a free market, a person could move from one private security agency to another. So if one decides to go to war with another, in order to pay for that war, they would have to basically... anyways, what I was saying is they would have to basically raise the cost of what they're charging to the firm, to the people whom are under their firm, and once they raise the cost, that will then incentivize the people under their firm to move to another one that doesn't charge as much. So as one tries to take over, they then have to charge more. That then incentivizes people to move to another one that doesn't go to war. So as they try to get more weapons, they start to lose more money, and they eventually also, so long as the other guys have agreements with each other to back each other up, if one goes crazy, then they would get stomped out as soon as they tried. So yeah, like it would kind of like the United. So if you took like the United Nations, if all of them have agreements with each other to help each other out, if one of them gets invaded, they're going to send a whole bunch of money and arms and weapons to that one and back up to help them out. And even if the people whom they are fighting against have a lot more money and weapons, they'll still be able to hold their own because of that backup.
Well, my argument wasn't, one of them going haywire. I'm saying the whole conglomerates of private security firms itself taking on the role of the state and starting to impose its will, quote unquote, involuntarily against a certain area of land and the people and property that exists within it.
Well,
Like there's technically
you
nothing stopping
you
them.
wouldn't expect that under in a company in a situation where it would be much less likely because there would be competition, and you wouldn't expect every single company to just all join one conglomerate. You would expect multiple competing conglomerates. So if you have multiple competing conglomerates, then they would have to take out all the other competing ones before they won. It's like
Yeah,
like
that's
that's like
essentially a country.
well, it's not a country. I mean, it depends on how you define country, I guess. But yeah, I would say they would have a hard time winning so long as there's competition in the market, and that's what we want. We want there to not be a monopoly on force.
But
mean, if there
picture
was
like
like a-
this. What's up?
Oh, I was gonna say if there was like a bunch of companies that got together, and like they were powerful enough, they could just say no one. They could even for now start by saying, hey, no more other countries are gonna start, or others we're gonna attack you. We'll allow the couple of other companies for now until like they either like inherently collapse or get weakened, and then we'll like take them out. They could very easily restart a state through that means.
Yeah, that's pretty much my point. He articulated it better than I could. But yeah.
Well, assuming that there's competition in the market, that again, and once that one company decides to go to war with the other, they're gonna have to pay for those services that include taking over those people. That's gonna cost more money in terms. They're gonna have to charge more money on the people who are paying for their services, which will then incentivize them to not pay for their services and go to one that doesn't charge as much. I mean, you could give me a theoretical situation if you like. Obviously, like if you have a situation where there's a very small market where there's only 50 people in an area, and yeah, it would probably be easy. I mean, theoretically there could be a monopoly in that situation, but as it becomes bigger and bigger and there's more competition in the market, it becomes harder because there's always going to be that one competitor that sort of comes in and other people like to compete with them. Whereas that's why even in the world, right, you don't really see a one world government, and the reason why that is because for one government to control the whole world is like almost impossible.
And the thing is, not that that there'd be a one world government, but cause that could become like very bloody real fast. But like, if let's say you have a town of like, I don't know, 10 to 20,000 people, and you have seven different rights enforcement agencies, and then 5 decide to get together because they think it's convenient because of maybe a specific circumstance, or maybe because they just generally want to have it because they're afraid they're worried about another company, or they want to like defeat them in some specific incidents or whatever. And they basically say, okay, we're gonna, now that we've gotten together, and any other company besides the 2 companies that exist, they're not allowed to come on the market. Only ones that are allowed are the last 2, and we're gonna like we're gonna basically completely like cut you off. Anyone no one is allowed to switch to us if they. That'd be a bad idea. Never mind. If they were to like basically let those 2 companies eventually fail, or they get particularly weakened for whatever specific reason, maybe it's a bad year or what have you, or whatever exactly happens, they're weak, and then they go in and basically like take them out. They could very easily restart a government through that means, and have a state, at least in their local area. And then of course if that company then goes into invade other places, that could force rights enforcement agencies and defense agencies, what have you, to form one group to fight them off, and then that could easily lead to them creating a state, and it could very easily lead to Ancapistan falling.
Well, that's assuming that the people under their rule are going to be okay with those people just going in and taking over. And Ancapistan, the people under Ancapistan, in order to get lower premiums, they would most likely basically arm themselves in order to protect themselves, so that they don't have to pay as high of premiums to their insurance companies. So and so if they feel like their insurance companies are going to turn on them, what they could do is unsubscribe to them and then start buying weapons, and then they would have to fight every single individual person who's armed within that area.
That could discourage it unless they decided that they would, like kind of how a lot of people do right now, that they would rather kind of put out the government that they think is tyrannical rather than fight. Like look.
We're talking about Ancapistanners here, all right? We're gonna fight.
I mean, so the first generation or two might have like such a strong opposition to states, but like give it a bunch of generations down the line. Like
once they see all the wealth and beauty created, and then of course you're saying multiple generations, but then you're talking about a town of 20,000 people. If you have multiple generations, I would expect it to grow much larger than that. And
well, I mean,
what you would expect is,
I'm not saying it started out at 20,000 people.
I mean, either way, I could just think of a hypothetical situation where they just form a bunch of they see that they're the people within that area, country are seeing that their insurance companies are consolidating power, and then they could just start their own militias because they would be allowed to. There would be nothing illegal in Ancapistan to start your own militia and start your own business, and then compete with them, and then you could charge lower services because you're not buying a whole bunch of weapons to try to take over the area, and then people will flock to your private business as opposed to theirs.
See, this creates a lot of opportunities for a high level of violence, and one thing that most people don't seem to.
They're going to be incentivized not to do that. They're going to be incentivized not to go to war because they don't want people to take their competition. If they start gathering arms and spending a bunch of weapons on arms to take over, they're going to have to charge those citizens in order to pay for that. That would then mean that they're going to have to charge more.
That's not true, and I could explain why. Most people don't seem to
going
understand
to war costs
that.
money. Gathering weapons costs money. Gathering soldiers costs money. Would you disagree with that?
We know that.
So they're going to have to charge more, right, for their services in order to make up for that cost, right?
That's not inherently true, and most people don't seem to understand that. Two things.
I mean, that's a
in
fact.
relation to this. Oh no! I'm not specifically talking about that, but well, I am, but indirectly. But most large companies don't actually make money from selling their services to everyday people like you and I, or individual citizens. That's not true. Like Amazon, for example.
Okay, so then
Amazon doesn't make money from selling to like average people.
That's just not true.
It is true. If you look up,
really, you really
I
think
go to
that?
school for cloud computing. Well, I know that because the large majority of the profit that Amazon made in pretty much year over year is from Amazon Web Services or cloud space.
Okay,
which is sold to
in
other
terms of
large
their,
companies.
are you talking
not
about their
individuals.
storefront, or are you talking about their
No, I'm
their
talking
web
about the
services?
company as a whole.
As a whole? Oh, well then if
Yeah.
you're talking about web services, yeah, if you're talking about something that's like super expensive that your average person can't pay for. I thought you were talking about the storefront.
Oh no! I was saying most large companies don't make, such as Amazon, don't
Well,
make
if they're
money
selling a
from
service, yeah, if they're selling a service that your average person can't pay for, right? Yeah, but in this situation, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a situation where your average person in Ancapistan would be able to afford a subscription for a private security firm.
What?
And if you think they
No.
wouldn't be able to, then then how is the state funded?
No, my point is, a lot of these large security firms, like say BlackRock, we don't have to speculate this. Large security firms that exist today don't make money by selling to individuals or even homeowners associations. They make money by selling their services to either states or other large companies or large conglomerates.
Yeah, but these private security firms in this hypothetical are not making money from selling to big corporate money. They're making money from selling their services to average individuals.
There's more money in selling their services to other big corporations. Why would what?
I mean,
what's the profit in selling
I'm sure there would be.
to the average
There's
person?
going to be there's gonna be money from corporations that'll probably buy their services for security, but the people under them who are buying their services are also buying their services, and the combined amount of people, right, that are buying their services tend to far outweigh the amount of people who are like the very few people who have a lot of money. That's why most companies in the world, like if you look at Walmart, like any pizzeria, any restaurant, any clothing store, any pretty much any store that you could think of, most of them aren't just catering to the 1%. They're catering to every individual person, and the reason why is they want to make as much money from everyone as they can. So that's not necessarily true.
Well, but that's not my point. My point is, a lot of these companies are making money from selling not just to large individuals or like high net worth individuals. They're making money from selling their services
to the companies
to other
too.
companies.
Yeah, that goes for the companies too.
Companies as a whole have a lot more value in terms of, selling services to that they could give out and are willing to give out, and in some cases have to give out than the average person.
Why are these companies paying these private security agencies?
In order to protect their assets.
Okay, so if that private security agency starts arming up in order to take them over, they're going to have to charge them more in order to pay for that arm.
I'm not talking about military, right? Other companies. I'm talking about
hear me out. Just follow the logic. So let's say this company is paying, these companies, right, are paying this private security firm to protect them. And then they're using that money to arm up to then take them over. They're gonna have to charge them higher premiums in order to pay for that, for all that armor, weapons, and explosions, right? And explosives, right?
I mean, yeah, but I'm not talking specifically about other companies.
So follow this. Once their insurance premiums go up, right? They're going to choose to go to another company that doesn't charge as much, because they're giving the same service, they're being peaceful, but they're charging less, right? So if you have two options in front of you, and the option A is charging you less and it's giving you the same service as the other one, and then there's an option B that's charging you more but they're giving you the same service, which one are you going to choose?
There's a lot to unpack here. First of all,
I just need an answer to that. Hold on. I just want to answer to that question real quick.
That's not necessarily true, and it's not necessarily the case in all situations.
Well, it is in this situation.
Not always, because companies, there's not just the direct upfront price incentives for a lot of services.
So let's start from square one. So you're a private company, right? And you want to take over. You need weapons and an army and weapons in order to take that over, right?
I do.
Okay, so you need to, if you're a private security company, how do you get your money to do so? You charge premiums, insurance premiums.
Not always.
No? Then where are they getting their money?
No, not always.
Where do private securities get their money?
Loans. That's how nations get their money. They get money from loans.
Okay, so they get a bunch of loans. So they get a bunch of loans to get a bunch of weapons, right? So the people under their protection are seeing that this company is gathering a bunch of weapons, and all of these weapons are. So I don't. It's assuming they're getting enough money, loans to gather a bunch of weapons, take over literally the whole country.
It doesn't have to
eventually
be the whole country.
What would eventually happen is they would have no choice but to charge more for their services, because they are having to pay more in order to run their business. So when they once they charge more for their services, people will see that and be like, oh, look, this business here is charging more, but there's another business that's charging me less, and they are giving me the same service. So I'm going to move over to this one as opposed to this one. So the one that's spending a lot of money to get weapons in order to take people out, they are going to eventually, as they spend more money on weapons, they lose more customers because they have to charge more for their services.
So that assumes that direct upfront costs influence decisions when that's not always true.
They do.
We see this every day. That's not true.
Costs
We see this every day.
change. Listen, like if you increase the cost onto a business, what they don't always eat it. What happens is they have to raise the cost of their goods and services. So and once they raise the cost of their goods and services, that then incentivizes people to go somewhere else. Now, it's one thing if the cost is being risen because they're paying for something that they're actually tangibly getting, right? Then they could justify that risen cost. But if they're raising the cost while giving the same service, well, then people are going to move to another company that isn't spending their money on weapons needlessly. And that will then incentivize more companies to be more efficient and only provide the best service to the people who are under their watch. Because if they don't, then the people under them can just choose to buy another company. And so long as you have weapons and a group of guys, you could start your own private security company. So, yeah.
My point was...
Also, the people under Ancaps could just use guerrilla warfare, and then they'll win.
Okay, that's not always true, but...
I mean, it worked
my point was...
It worked for a lot of countries.
Yeah, but it doesn't work for all. And the point
obviously
is...
not as all. Everything is all. Obviously, hypothetically, you could give me a situation where it could go haywire. All I'm arguing is less likely to happen than in a statist system. Statists are much more likely to go to war with... States are much more likely to go to war with each other than private companies are.
Is that... I mean, that's not always true because, I mean, you could technically classify like private militias. Most of the wars and armed conflicts that are going on right now are not going on between two designated states. A lot of them are going on between civilian militias. So maybe
I don't agree with that.
Currently,
I don't think that's true.
You don't think so? I mean, the largest one right now, well, at least, well, maybe not right now, but the last time I was involved in
as far as I can tell, the two biggest wars that are going on right now was Israel-Palestine, and then there's Russia and Ukraine. Those are states. Okay, you
just gave me an example. Palestine isn't a state, and Hamas isn't a government organization.
They are a state. You don't think
Palestine is a state?
The Hamas is a state.
Hamas is a state.
Yeah, they're a state. They control that area. Well, they used to before they lost.
Okay, so that kind of, in a sense, justifies
they're a legitimized criminal organization.
They're a criminal organization. They're not a government. According to Google,
they were voted in by the Palestinians.
Well, governments.
That kind of proves my overall point. So. That's true, but
they are a state. They are the state. I mean they're literally
that's the point. Hamas didn't start off as a government.
All governments don't start off as a government. They generally start off as criminals and then they become a government. Yeah.
So what's stopping an insurance company from becoming a government?
I've already answered this question. I've answered. Wait, where were you the last 30, 40 minutes when I answered literally every single argument that you gave?
No, because your argument revolves around... Right.
No. The argument that you gave was that, the biggest wars that are happening in the world right now are happening between private companies. And I said, and I easily knocked that down, which is like, well, actually, no, that's not true. The biggest wars that are happening right now are going on between states. Mexico. And then you had to try. Then you tried to be like, oh well.
No,
Palestine is not a state.
Argument.
Don't the cartels bribe the government of Mexico? Like the government there is extremely corrupt.
Also, those aren't private companies; those are criminal organizations.
But a private company, the only differentiating factor between a private company and a criminal organization is what the state classifies it as.
No,
or a multinational organization.
Wait, that doesn't make any sense.
That's not true.
It makes perfect sense if you have any understanding.
No. A private company is a group of people who are providing you a good or a service in exchange for your money. In order to get profit.
Not doing that.
A cartel is a criminal. A cartel is in a criminal organization that goes and kills people.
that provides services, goods and services in
Yeah, but they
exchange
kill
for money.
people.
It
But not
provides,
Yeah,
not
but
a private
voluntarily,
company can kill people.
generally.
It has the
yeah, but
capability to do
hold
that.
on. If a private company went and shot somebody, they wouldn't be a private company. They would be a criminal organization. There's a difference.
So that's only a semantic difference.
Well,
A
yes,
private
that's
company can still shoot and kill somebody.
I would disagree that a cartel is a private company. They're not.
Okay, but
They're
that's
not
only a
engaging in
semantic.
consensual transactions. They're like forcing people.
It says who? They sell drugs to people who,
Yes,
in
but
some
they kill
time,
people. They murder people over turf. They
a
extort
private
people.
company can do that. And the only
they wouldn't
difference
be a
between
private company then.
cartel, okay, so that's only semantic. That's
Yes.
only a semantic difference.
Pretty important semantic.
And
Yeah, but
there's
it's
no-
semantics is pretty important.
I mean, not.
Sometimes.
I mean, it's important.
If you're
when
trying to
you have
define
a
two
government-
things, yes. So, like, are you saying that Walmart is the same as the Cali cartel? Is that what you're trying to say?
It could be if the Walmart decided to form an armed wing of
Yeah,
itself.
but no.
and start
I'm saying Walmart
enforcing
as
its-
it is right now. Are you saying they're the same as a like a cartel in Mexico? Are you saying they're the
I'm
same
not saying
thing?
the only reason why they're not the same is because there's a government or
No,
overarching.
no. So you're saying if there was no government and Walmart was the same thing as it was now, it would be a criminal organization, just even though it.
It has the capability of becoming one.
No, I didn't ask you if it had the capability. I asked you if
I
it
mean,
was.
right
Okay,
now
you're just playing with words at this point.
No, but
my
you're not
point
making
is-
any sense.
It makes perfect sense because the only thing that differentiates a private company is a legal document saying you are a limited liability corporation that's recognized by the government, and you have the legal ability to practice
private
commerce
company?
with a limited amount of liability tied to that individual and not the company itself. That's what a private company by law is. And if we strip the law
Hold
away,
on, I don't know who you think you're talking to, but we're not statists. We're anarchists.
yeah,
So
but my point
how
is,
we defined a private company versus a criminal organization is completely different from how a state does. So how we would define a private company is a group of people, again, like I said earlier, a group of people that are providing some sort of good and service in exchange for money in order to make a profit. A criminal organization are people who violate people's rights, the non-aggression principle, either by physically harming, or taking people's stuff. There's a clear difference between the two.
is BlackRock a criminal organization?
I don't really know anything.
I mean,
about
not BlackRock.
I don't
Sorry,
really.
Blackwater. Blackwater. Sorry, Blackwater.
I can't give you an answer to that because I don't know what that
Blackwater.
is.
So Blackwater is a private military organization.
Are they violating the NEP?
I mean, they're basically licensed by either multinational
that's not my
companies
question.
or. No, I'm getting to that. They're licensed by the government, or I mean, contractors, private military contractors who are responsible for either
Are they hired by the
protecting
state?
shipping lanes. They could be hired by the state or by a private shipping company.
Yeah, then they are an arm of the state.
Private shipping companies are the state.
Well, yeah, they're being paid by the state to do their bidding.
So private.
So if I pay you to murder somebody,
No,
right? You're
no.
a criminal
No,
organization, right?
I'm not going to let you get away with this. I'm not going to. I said private shipping companies as well, which is not the state.
Is the government paying the private shipping companies to do their bidding?
No, the private
Okay, so
shipping companies
who's the one that's
are
getting paid to do the
responsible
state's
for-
bidding?
I'm not talking about the state. I'm talking about private shipping companies. Why are you leaving that up or choosing to not address that?
Address what? We were talking about private
The
security
private shipping
companies.
companies.
What about
I'm
them?
talking. All right. My point is, private shipping companies, right? They pay BlackRock to, protect their shipping lines. Is BlackRock not? I mean, not BlackRock. Sorry, Blackwater.
It depends on if
Would they not be
the company
considered
is
a criminal organization
it
because
depends.
they kill people.
It depends on if that company is violating the non-aggression principle. And if, let's say, if they're paying them to protect, if I'm paying you to protect my boat, that's not violating the NAP. If the state is paying you to protect me, then that is a violation of the non-aggression principle because you're protecting stolen property.
Wait, so I understand that point, but Blackwater, right?
So the
they're
crucial
responsible
question
for
is
numerous
are they
humans.
violating the NAP? That's the only way I can answer that question.
They could if they decided to, which is the point.
No,
These
I'm not
private
asked. That's
security
not the
companies
question that
could
I
if
asked
they
you.
want.
That's not the question that anybody
I
could be a
I'm
criminal
not.
if they decide to. I could be a criminal
Yeah,
if I
and
decide to.
anybody
That
could
doesn't add. That's not
violate
making
the
a point.
NAP. And the point of the NAP is, and what I said before is important. Rights are not real. The NAP is technically not real unless it's
Okay, but
legally
that's not going to stop me
codified
from
by the
believing
state.
it. That's not going to
Huh?
stop me from believing in it.
Yeah, but another person doesn't have to agree with it, and they could come over and take your stuff.
Yeah, but
And
that's
the
like
private
saying
security
that's like
company-
saying
Yeah.
yeah, but that's like saying you shouldn't support. Do you believe that rape is wrong? Let me ask you this real quick.
Of course I do.
Okay, yeah, but somebody could come up to you and rape you.
Yeah, but
So
there's
why does it
a
matter?
state that it's
No,
technically
no, no. But
illegal.
why does it
Well,
matter?
it's
Rights aren't
illegal.
real.
Rights are real in this country because there are rights are codified by the government by law.
Okay, but your rights can be codified by things other than the state, right?
Says who?
Me.
The state. So you're
Right now.
the head of the state. So you're the arbiter of
Wait,
the
hold
law?
on. Can I?
No, I'm
Can I?
Jump
I have an
in, go ahead.
empirical. I have an example from history that kind of disproves Fang's claim here. Wait, hold on. Fang, is your claim that you can't have law without a state to enforce it?
I mean, not necessarily. I'm just saying that the reason why the rights exist is because the state says in the Constitution or the law says these are your rights. At any point, if the state is overthrown, then those rights no longer matter if they decide to change it. If the next government or arbiter of law decides to change it. Like, I don't think rights exist.
Yeah, but you believe in rights.
Objectively,
But
I
yet
said
you believe in
I mean,
objectively.
we don't believe either. Like we don't believe in natural law like many libertarians do. We don't really. Sithis and I were talking about this earlier. Like, we don't really believe in that
Objective
rights are like
morality.
metaphysically real. Yeah, we're not.
All we're
not
saying, like
realists
all we're
like
saying
that.
is like this is the principle that we support. This is the principle that we believe in, and here's why we are against the state because they violate this principle.
Which is fair, but my point is I mean, for larger society, I don't think that would be.
Yeah, I mean, somebody
practical.
could violate
Not
the
only practical,
NAP.
but-
It's like someone could violate the NAP against me right now, but that's not going to stop me from believing in the NAP. Like, for instance, if somebody for instance, even if there's no state, let's say me and you drop on an island somewhere and there's no state around, is that going to stop me from supporting the NAP even though you have the ability to stab me? No, because in the end of the day, like, it's a principle that we hold in every situation. Like the same thing with like if I were to ask you, hey, do you think rape is wrong? Like, obviously you're gonna say like, yeah, rape is obviously wrong. Oh, but let's say you're on an island and somebody rapes you. Well, I guess that does your rights aren't real. It's just like, well, yeah, obviously rights aren't real in the sense that they're a physical object that you could touch, but that's not gonna stop me from believing in them because I have principles, right?
I mean, you have principles, but when we're talking about, armed group essentially taking over a share of land and saying, all right, your rights are no longer real. We're going to start levying fees, or AKA taxes, but they could call it fees because technically they're a private company. And basically, this is ours
there's a
now.
huge
You can't
difference.
do anything about it. When we're talking about tangible, I'm talking in terms of tangibles, not like saying, oh, I believe this, I believe that. Like the law, creates a sense of tangibility because it enforces these principles and it's codified instead of just a group of people saying, I believe in this. If this principle is violated, then I no longer, it is what it is. Like there's nothing,
Yeah, but you
protecting
could
you.
say that about any principle. Any person could say, I believe in this principle, and then anyone could come up to you and then violate that principle. But again, should that stop you from believing in that principle because someone can violate it?
I mean, not at all, but it's specifically when it comes to define the NAP. Let's get this out the way first.
Yeah, so the
Define
NAP would be the non-aggression principle, and in
Right.
other words, that would mean nobody has the right to initiate force against you.
Okay.
So we're against the state because we believe they initiate force against us through taxation.
Right. So my point is, you are arguing that the reason why the cartel is not a private company, right? is because they are a violent criminal organization that initiates force against people without their consent. Am I correct?
Yeah.
My
It's,
point
it's,
is,
it's kind of a big difference.
my point is, if we're talking realistically, right? The only thing that separates Blackwater from the cartels, a criminal organization, is the fact that Blackwater is licensed to do this by the United States government, and they work within a certain set of regulation and oversight by the United States government, or not even a company like Blackwater, like any private security company, like, I don't know, Allied or whatever. And that differentiates from the cartel, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a criminal organization or even a terrorist organization. Technically, Blackwater and the cartel do the same things, but due to the government, they have different classifications.
Well, that's why we don't use it. That's why we don't have this government as our standard as to whether or not a company is a criminal organization or not a criminal organization. We define whether or not a business is a criminal organization, differentiate whether a business is a business or a criminal organization based on whether or not they violate the non-aggression principle. If they violate the non-aggression principle, then they're a criminal organization. If they do not, then they're just any other company.
And that's fair because that's your colloquial sense. But when we're talking in terms of, reality, or the official terms
I
of
understand
things,
that
use
right
legal
now
terms.
my beliefs aren't law. But again, that's not going to stop me from believing in it.
I respect
what's
that,
going to
but
change
it's
my
not
beliefs
realistic.
is arguments. I mean, you could. That's not going to change my beliefs either. But fundamentally, what's going to change the best argument you could give me to change my ideology is to try to convince me that the current state, as it is not a rights violator. That's the only thing that would change my position. Even if you argued to me that, it's unrealistic. Someone could just violate your rights. The state doesn't classify this as being a criminal organization. What do you have to say to that? Well, it's just like, no, that's not going to change my opinion about anything on the slightest because I don't recognize the state and I believe in NAP.
Well, I understand that and I respect that, but my point is your only differentiation between a criminal organization and a private company is whether they violate the NAP. But when in reality, a private company could at any point violate the NAP if they really want to. And that criminal organization element wouldn't really matter because there's no state to say, all right, this is a terrorist or criminal organization. We're going to go after them and ban them.
You're kind of respectfully, you're kind of repeating yourself. So I'll give you the same.
I have to.
So I'm gonna give it to you, and you also agree with me on my rebuttal, which I don't know why you're repeating yourself after agreeing with my rebuttal, which is, let's say that you are in an island, and someone tries to rape you, right? Are you gonna stop believing that rape is wrong because someone has the ability to rape you?
Well, that's the issue. The NAP is only a belief.
I understand that, but do you believe that it's wrong to rape someone?
I do, but
okay. So let's say you're on hold on, hear me out. So let's say you're on an island, and someone tries to rape you. Are you gonna stop believing that rape is wrong?
I'm not gonna believe it, but that's just a hypothetical situation.
Then it doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter because saying, "Oh, well, someone could come up to you and violate your rights," does not change. It's not going to change whether or not I believe in the NAP. It's not, and you don't agree with that either. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just explaining to you reality. Reality. You think I don't know that someone could come up to me and violate my rights? You don't think I don't know that?
Of course, but you're in your hypothetical society. There's nothing codified in the law that says, okay, there's nothing.
The NAP is the law.
There's no law. Wait, so the NAP
we do
is
believe
the law.
In law.
So what's going to enforce that law? And you're saying private organizations.
Yeah,
what if
you already know my answer to that question, and I've already
see
all of these questions you're about to ask. I've already answered. So,
but there's nothing that requires those private organizations to go after you and protect the NAP.
What do you think is gonna?
Then I should do it myself. Okay, what if you don't have the means to do it?
You're saying what's gonna make these companies to
require
protect people? What's requiring these companies to
that's
protect
gonna
you?
require-
Nothing technically requires Walmart to give you tasty food. Nothing technically requires McDonald's to give you a good hamburger that tastes delicious. But you know what? You know what incentivizes them to do so? The fact that if they don't do so, they're gonna lose money.
Okay, the definition of, well, that's not true. First of all, they could just say, all right, this isn't, we're not going to take this matter.
Wait.
Other
If you're
companies
meaning
do
to
that
tell
all
me
the
that
time.
if McDonald's sold a bunch of shitty burgers, a whole bunch of people, that people would just
What?
be okay with it and just whatever.
I mean, first of all, they already do. First of all, second of
That's
all,
not true. That's just objectively false because people go to their
McDonald's-
store all the time. People buy
the-
McDonald's every single day.
literally but what you said
That's your
is
opinion.
true. Like the government.
That's not the opinion of most people.
Do you know what's in a lot of McDonald's chicken? Like
That doesn't
McDonald's
stop
chicken
people from
isn't
going
even
there and
chicken,
eating it every single day. People
but they
obviously
sell
like
shitty
it.
burgers. But they sell
People
shitty
still like
burgers.
it. People like it.
Okay, but all right, but okay. Let's.
I'm not talking about shitty burgers in the sense
definition of
that
law-
hold on. I'm not talking about shitty burgers in the sense that they're bad for you. Obviously, I would agree that McDonald's isn't good for you. I mean the sense that people like it enough to spend their money on it.
The definition of law is system of rules and guidelines generally backed by governmental authority. So the NAP.
You can have government without a state.
I thought you
Notice how it
guys
says generally
differentiated
backed.
governance.
Also, it says generally.
Okay,
too.
yeah, I understand it says
Well-
generally, but a system of laws and guidelines needs
We
to be
believe in the
enforced
NAP.
if it's going to be the NAP isn't enforced.
Oh my
depends
god!
on
You,
whether
oh my
somebody-
god! You're repeating yourself at this point. We've already told you. You said that you're saying that the NAP is not going to be enforced. Why? What do you think my
I didn't say
response
it's
is going to
not
be to
going
that
to
question?
be enforced. I'm just going to say it is not enforced because
Okay,
there's
what
no
do you think?
overarching government
It is.
authority.
It literally
going to-
is. It literally
They
is.
could just say
And
we're
there
not going to
is.
take your case. Okay, they could just say we cannot. We're
Okay,
not.
and,
We're
and
currently
McDonald's
unable
could
to take your
say, and
case.
McDonald's could say, I'm not going to serve you. But you know what's
Yeah,
incentivizing them to do so?
it's not
But you
a
know what's
law.
incentivizing them to do so? The fact that if you don't,
Have
they're
you
going to
ever-
lose
Have
money.
you ever been told we're not going to take your case? That happens all the time.
Has McDonald's ever told you, I'm not going to sell you food?
Okay, I've been told we're not going to take your case, or we're not going to accept this as valid by private companies all the time. And I'm
Okay, so
literally
when
just
you go to
started by
McDonald's, they
it
say,
just happened.
I'm not going to sell to you. I don't want to sell to you.
I'm not talking about McDonald's. Insurance companies don't sell you stuff, or they're always like, "We're not going to take your case."
What
This is
company?
in-
Wait. What? Could you name me
What?
name me a?
What?
If you
Have
pay
you ever heard of pre-existing conditions and insurance companies not insuring people due to pre-existing conditions?
I don't. see
what they
your
would do
point
is they would charge higher premiums.
But
Normally
sometimes
what
they
they
could
do is
just
they
not
charge
take
higher
your case.
premiums.
But
they
they
would
could- a
normally
lot of
just
the
charge
time-
higher
Take your
premiums.
case.
Yeah, they don't have to take their case.
So what?
Okay, so then
So
it's
what?
not a law. The NAP is not a law because it's not enforced.
No.
Because
A
somebody
law,
could just say
again,
we're not going to take
a
your
law,
case.
it can be
That's the
enforced
same
though, and
as
it
the
will be
NAP.
enforced.
It
And there are
can be
private companies
enforced,
force.
but there's
It will be
nothing technically
private
requiring
companies will
it to
do
be
it.
enforced.
Yeah, private companies are going to do it.
A private company could just say no, though, which is the point. The point is it's
Then you
not
could go to another
codified by
one.
law.
You could go to another competing one.
And my overall point, my rebuttal to that was a lot of the times, large organizations do not sell to average people, such as private companies.
That's not true. But that's not
private
true.
security firms.
That's
What
not
private
true.
security firms sell to an average earning person?
In fact, there's
Name one.
there's an app that you could download that you could pay for a private security officer to literally go to you right now, so long as you pay
A
the fee.
large conglomerate.
So
a
long
lot
as
of
you
the
pay the
times
fee,
these are just
yes.
regular people.
Yeah, and I can
Or,
imagine something like that working in under anarcho-capitalism. Yeah.
Yeah, I could too, but a lot of the times people don't have the
All
ability
right. So
to
just
pay,
because
and
you can,
large
well, if you can
conglomerates-
imagine it happening, then
They
what you could
wouldn't
do is you could
it's
apply
not
that model.
sustainable.
What you could do is you could apply that model to and scale it upwards so that more people are able to afford it, and then there you go. More people are able to be protected.
As we
and then
see
the
today,
NAP
a
will be
lot
law.
of as we see today, private companies oftentimes see it as financially.
Hold on, let me
it
ask you.
doesn't
Wait,
financially make any sense to serve
You
average
do realize
people.
that the state does. There are times where the state refuses service to people, right?
Yeah, I understand. But
Okay, so
it's
then
a
I
lot
guess the
more,
state. I guess the state can't. There are situations where the state does refuse to protect you, right?
They are, but at
Okay,
the end
so
of the
then
day,
that
the
argument
state
that you
isn't
made. Hold on,
operating. No,
excuse
no,
me.
no, 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 no,
Excuse
no,
me.
no.
So
Shut
that
up, shut up.
argument that
No, I know
no.
what you're gonna say.
So that
I know
argument
what
that
you're
you
gonna
just
say,
made
bro.
against the private company can also apply to the states, which would also mean that under your precondition, that means that the
This-
state is not actually able to enforce laws because
But it's
they could
capable of
refuse
doing
service
it,
to you.
but the state is a far more how should I put this? A far more reliable source of services. It may not
I
always be the best
completely
services.
disagree with you on that.
When it comes to protection,
Yeah, I completely disagree.
I could assume that you have a police department in your state, county, and town, dude.
Okay, so
I
they're
could
always
guarantee you
reliable.
have
Okay,
it.
so if you live
I'm not
in the
saying that
middle,
they're always reliable. Nothing
Okay,
is
so then-
completely foolproof.
okay, so then your standard that you were throwing against the private company, saying, "Oh, well, there are situations where where private companies do refuse you service." Well, I've given you a situation where there are many times in which the state refuses services.
The difference
and,
is the state isn't operating out of profit motive. They're not motivated by profits.
Yeah, they
But
are.
yeah, but that's a bad thing
You mean
the state
I'd
still
say
wants
it's a
because that
make
good
doesn't
money. What are you talking
incentivize.
about?
Because that doesn't
course the state wants
incentivize
to
you
make
them
money.
to give you a good service. If they're not making profit, then what's incentivizing them to give you a good service?
I mean,
Nothing.
private security doesn't always incur profit from serving the average person. Hence, why they could easily refuse to serve somebody if it's not.
And then another company will come
valuable
and serve
to-
Yeah,
that
then another
person.
company will come in and do that.
It's not. You realize
Yeah,
that
you're running.
a
Respectfully, you're running in circles. So I think we should just move on.
I know I am, because you're not. Your points are just not realistic.
We've rebutted every
it's
single
not
one of
realistic in a
respectfully. We've
real
rebutted every
situation.
one of your points.
Everything you're doing, you rebutted them in a debate setting, but it's not rational to
I
assume that this
understand
could
that
exist in real life.
just because you disagree with my points doesn't mean I didn't rebut your arguments.
Well, I'm not saying you could have rebutted
it-
my argument in a debate setting simply because I didn't present my argument in a good enough way, but it's just not realistic. What you're arguing is
I
it's just
get that
not
you
realistic,
disagree.
dude.
I get.
How
I
is
get
it
I'm,
that
not
you
I'm, not,
disagree.
I'm just saying it's not rational to assume that this could happen if you have any experience in the real world dealing with companies, because companies don't always operate in the good of the average everyday person. They often operate in their own interests and in the interests of other large
Yes, everyone operates in their own
corporations.
interest. The
My
people in
point
government
is-
operate in their own interests.
But they have a duty to uphold a certain level of standards that not only themselves in the method of due process or whatever.
But you don't even believe
checks
they
and
follow their
balances.
standards.
But that doesn't, not always, but they're still, to the large extent that they follow their own standards. Obviously, under this current administration, that's being challenged. But generally speaking, they have a sense of due process. They create disincentives through fees and fines, as well as the court system, prevent not only themselves but private citizens and private organizations from acting out of those set standards that they've created. And there's a sense of accountability that the average person has through their votes or impeachment or whatever to hold them accountable. There's technically nothing holding a large company accountable to the average person, because a lot of the times large companies do business with other large companies, and that's the lion's share of their profit. Maybe they start off, I go back to Amazon and Google, they start off by giving services to the average person, but overall, as they become more and more large and more profitable, they go on to serve other large organizations. Now they're essentially out of the they're no longer accountable to the average person. So now they could really just do whatever they want, as we see with social media companies now to this day. The only reason why they're being held accountable is because they're being taken to court, which is through the government. And they have to pay fees and fines to the government that's holding them
I just
accountable.
think it's just kind of funny that you're like so concerned about like extortion or private companies doing things like robbing people or harming people, but You seem not to care at all about what the state does.
Oh no, I completely care about the state, but the difference between the state and a private company is I could technically, or no, this applies to a private company as well. I could take them to court if I really want to, and the state is going to either check itself or check that company. And I can get
I completely disagree with you on that.
I've done it before.
The state has the state has investigated itself and found no wrongdoing. Yes, got you. No,
you can be paid restitution by the state. That's why there's different departments that exist. There's a certain level, not even of hierarchy.
So let's say you're under a state.
Bro,
let's say you're under a state, and they say you take it to court, and their court says, nope, we're not giving you anything, even though you have evidence. Now what?
Well, I'm not saying the state is foolproof. I'm just saying it's
then you're fucked, right?
Far better. I mean, in that situation, yeah, but I'm not saying the state is foolproof. I'm not a debate, bro. I'm just a realist. I've literally sued New York City because New York City gave me a ticket that I found unjust, and I took them to court, and New York City found them to be
but that's an exception.
Yeah, you're right.
That's an exception to the rule. Most states in the world don't allow you to just check them. Most states don't just allow you to take them to court.
I live in the United States. That's because their states are flawed. Fundamentally, I'm not saying that every state is completely foolproof, but there's certain states that are better than others in the way that they handle themselves,
in the
way
criminals.
That they're held accountable. I mean, that exists.
See,
but I'm not saying.
The thing is, if I'm going to have somebody look over me, right? If I'm going to have somebody protect me, I'd rather it be a group of people who are in it for profit, that don't have the interest of violating my rights or forcing me to pay into their system.
Says who?
Whereas you are okay with having, are okay with having a criminal organization, basically look over you and forcefully extract your wealth out of your paycheck, pay for wars and murder. So,
my biggest issue with
I'm more of a real. I would say I'm more of a realist. You know what I'm saying? I'm not okay with things like that personally.
Bro, that private company that you are paying into could easily show up to your house with guns and say, "Hey, man, I don't care."
I've already rebutted these arguments. See, the fact that you're making this argument, the fact that you're even making this argument just shows you weren't even listening to this.
Bro, I'm not. Bro, again, I'm not a debate, bro. I'm a realist.
I get it. The fact that you're just making this argument just shows you weren't even listening to the whole debate.
Why do you keep saying you're a realist?
Because it's not realistic.
You may be a realist, quote unquote, but you're not a very good listener because I rebutted these arguments.
I'm not a debate, bro. I'm not a debate, bro.
I can tell.
We're not debating. What are you talking about?
This isn't
I'm
not a debate bro neither, bro.
There's nothing stopping them from doing that.
There is things stopping them. There are things stopping them. I've answered this question like 20 times.
They can literally show up to your and
there's nothing stopping the government from raping you right now.
Technically, no. I mean, there's checks and balances. Again, I've been paid by the state.
So let's say the state. Okay, so let's say the state tomorrow gets taken over. Let's say the state that's taken over by an authoritarian group.
Bro, I'm not a statist, bro.
And then they say, "Hey, we're gonna come here. We're gonna come here and stab you." And now it's legal to stab you. What are you gonna do about it?
Then that's a flaw on the state. But most states don't.
There's nothing you can do. You're screwed. You're done for. So it seems like your government has no real checks and balances because they could do whatever they want to you, and then you're basically fucked.
Our government does have checks and balances.
So the criticism that you just levied against the private companies actually applies to your state even more so.
I mean,
because your state is a monopoly.
I don't see the difference between a state and a private company. In your situation,
because you don't understand.
A private company can literally act as a state, which is why I left anarcho-capitalism.
There's a very easy difference between a private company and a criminal organization.
The difference between a private company and a state in anarcho-capitalism is really just semantical. They could literally take on the role of a state.
But the state, I mean, hold on. Private companies could be a private company and not be a criminal organization, right? Whereas every single state is a criminal organization. That's the difference. There could be some private companies that aren't criminal organizations, but there can't be a state that isn't a criminal organization. And the reason why is because they violate your rights.
Is if they are in violation of a set of legally defined and legally codified laws.
They violate your rights every single day. Do you disagree?
First of all, I don't believe that I have inalienable rights. I think that the only rights that I have are rights that the state gave me. I don't.
So
nobody has rights here.
So if your state says that they have the right to rape your ass, you would say, "Hey, well, they have the right to do it."
They have. I could disagree with their new.
But they would have the right to do it.
But they technically, legally speaking, they have the right to do it. Yes.
From your perspective, they would have the right to.
No, I mean the rights aren't real.
Okay, got you. No problem.
They're not real.
Got you. No problem.
Like. The rights only exist because the government says you have rights.
I've never knew anybody to actually admit to that, but that's okay, no problem.
I mean, the rights aren't real. Technically, if they said we have the right to do it, they have the legal right to do it if they wanted to, because they just codified the only thing that codifies law.
Yeah, from my perspective, the state never has the right to violate your rights. From my perspective, the state never has the right to rape anyone.
Well, technically,
whereas under your perspective, it seems like, it's all right, so long as they got the right or whatever.
Technically, you don't have rights in your ideal society because there's nothing that codifies those rights.
Neither do you. There's nothing that codifies your rights neither. The state could violate your rights at any moment. Nope, they don't. They could violate a right at any moment.
Yeah, that's why the government, there's laws against the government. There's laws that protect.
And they can break those laws at any moment.
They probably could, but I don't see that happening in the United States, at least. But
it happens every single day.
It probably does, but my point is,
okay, so then you're agreeing with me.
I can take them to court.
So you want a criminal organization representing you, whereas I want peaceful individuals who coordinate private property and make profit
and take
to represent me.
Like I literally don't see anything that's preventing a private militant organization.
Yeah, I've answered this question. Yeah, I know you can't see it because you had a hard time listening.
It literally happened in Iraq. Maybe a state sanctioned it.
I understand that you have a hard time listening.
It was done by a private organization. So
it wasn't a private. Wait,
I listened to what you said.
Terrorists are private organizations?
Bro, Blackwater is a private organization, dude.
As far as I could tell, they work for the state. They're criminal. They work for the state.
They may work for the state, but they are a private organization.
No, they're criminal.
Okay, so a private organization in your society could become a criminal as well at any point, and there's nothing stopping them.
They could, but the state is a criminal. The state is a criminal. There's a difference.
By your definition,
again, there's a huge difference between a private company versus a state. See, a private company is not criminal, and even though they could become criminal, they're not criminal, whereas the state is criminal.
But the only thing that differentiates these things are your semantics. There's nothing codifying it in the law.
Yeah, I believe in the non-aggression principle. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to violate innocent people's rights.
Semantics are important when we're dealing in a discord with like.
They're also important when you're dealing with law.
Yeah.
Correct.
They are, but there's
and people's
legal
lives.
Scholars that look over it and enforce those things. And then there's technically nothing enforcing the law, the non-aggression
law.
And there's nothing enforcing your law.
You don't need to have a centralized authority. We've already gone over this, haven't we?
I mean, you don't, but it could turn into chaos. And you already described the situation where the civilians would rise up.
They rob you every day.
Hold on, wait. Why didn't it turn into chaos in medieval Ireland from approximately 1100 to 1600, somewhere around that time period? They had decentralized arbitration and rights and like private. They had private, basically defense companies. These little like militias, and there wasn't war between them during that period. It was Britain that came in and took them over after about 500 years.
So that's 500 years of peace and private companies protecting individuals.
When was this again?
This was, I think it was around 1100, so like 1100 to a little after 1600, when Britain finally conquered Ireland, and they kind of destroyed their whole system. They had, for a very long time, I think even longer than that time period, actually, they had
medieval
decentralized enforcement. Well, medieval Iceland was different. They didn't have when it came to arbitration, from what I recall, they actually had a centralized authority, so they weren't quite as anarcho-capitalist as Ireland actually was.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll take your word
capitalism
for
it.
technically didn't exist at that point. We had feudalism, but I mean, again,
Well,
that's been
Well, I just
capitalism.
told you what
Capitalism is
Ireland
just
wasn't
free
like
exchange of goods and
capitalism
services.
literally was invented.
Wait,
in the
why did you bring up
1700s.
why did you bring up feudalism?
What do you mean?
Not
Because
relevant.
feudalism was the main socioeconomic
It doesn't
system at that
in
point.
Ireland that's not how it works though. I just
Also,
But
capitalism-
in Ireland.
Capitalism is just
at that
free
point.
exchange of goods and services. It's not
Well,
something you
they
can
actually were
invent.
pretty capitalist during that time in Ireland.
Yeah, nobody invented capitalism. All they did is put a word to it, something that was already there.
Yeah, they had like a proto-anarcho-capitalist system, even if
Yeah.
capitalism hadn't been coined yet, and they didn't think about it like that. That's essentially how they functioned.
Yeah,
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
capitalism
whoa.
is just a
Civil
word
wars,
that we put
land
on a phenomenon that was going on.
confiscation and penal laws. Interesting.
Hmm?
I said civil wars, land confiscations, and penal laws. That's interesting.
Where in Ireland?
Yeah. Oh, this is after your period of time, but I mean,
Okay,
because there was nothing
yeah.
stopping that from happening if there was no central government. But at the same time,
I mean,
central
but it
governments
did.
back
But
then,
wait, it did.
huh?
They had
was
they
civil
had
war.
pe-
Civil
relative
wars
peace
for
for a
land
They
long
had
time
relative
confiscations
peace
and-
for almost 500
until
years.
until a state came in and conquered them.
Yeah.
That was their that was the
I mean,
problem.
it seems like civil wars and land confiscations happened before that, but I don't know. I'm not versed on Irish
I mean, I'm
history.
sure
You're so
some
adamant.
did.
I mean, you were just so adamant that it could never work. And then when we give you an
Again,
example,
I don't subscribe to a specific political belief. I'm just saying that your
Well,
ideal
the whole point
situation
of what
is just retarded. Honestly, that's just.
I mean, you can
what
say
I-
you were
it's
acting
retarded,
like it's
but we have.
impossible, but I just gave you an example briefly of where it actually worked pretty well.
Yeah,
for
and
you.
I'm looking into it at the as of now. The King plus
Okay.
phone implementations. What we. I'm gonna get ChatGPT's to go over this. It's too late for me to read.
No, sure.
I don't. In my
Also, that's not the only example of free market anarchism being.
I know them all.
Possible.
I used to be an anarcho-capitalist, so I know
So
them
the
all.
thing is, it is definitely
Do
possible.
you know medieval Ireland?
Lawlessness and weak control. The English crown struggle. Okay, that's when England went to go take them over, so that doesn't count. Colonization, reconquest and rebellion.
He's like, oh my god, I gotta find a way to make this example not
No, I'm
good.
just looking.
I
I'm
gotta
just
find a way to
looking
make this
into-
example not work so I
I
can make
can't
these
find
guys look so
Irish
dumb.
history. I'm just not versed on Irish history, bro.
No, you're
I mean,
good.
if
I'm just
you
bringing
go,
in
are you
rules.
on
Irish
ChatGPT?
history. Yeah,
There's a whole Wikipedia page about.
yeah, I know. I'm just having
Graham law,
ChatGPT
which is what they had.
summarize
But the
what's
thing
going
is,
on.
I
Norman
wouldn't say
invasion
it. I mean,
seems to
even if
happen.
it's not 100% an ANCAP society, it's
The
a pretty good
lordship of
example
Ireland.
in which a lot of the functions of the state could be privatized, and it wouldn't just completely end in total disaster as you claim.
Okay, so the Gaelic. I'm assuming you're talking about the Gaelic resurgence from 1350 to 1500, because a lot of this ended in civil war and basically what I would describe what Ancapistan would turn into.
Wait, what do you mean? When did it end in civil war? What are you talking?
So from the time period that I'm assuming you're talking about is the Gaelic resurgence from 1350 to 1500. I'm just looking at overall Irish history in that period.
Yeah, but you also got to understand that the people there weren't ANCAPs in the sense that they believed in anarcho-capitalism. I would argue that if we had a situation, this is a situation where people who are not ANCAPs like stumbled upon anarcho, like a very similar or a very close form of anarcho-capitalism, right? But if you had a situation where you had people who are actually self-prescribed anarcho-capitalists and believe in anarcho-capitalism, I think it would be a lot different.
The problem is not everybody in your society would agree with anarcho-capitalism, and as we see throughout
That's
history,
what we're
there's
trying to
a
change
lot
minds,
of,
man.
arguments over the purity of anarcho-capitalism,
one group saying this isn't real anarcho-capitalism. You guys are bullshitting, and then another group.
Well, I
would
would
be like,
rather
"No,
have
this is
multiple
absolutely-"
ANCAPs debating about
Oh wow! The
about
murder
debating
of
about
William,
what is actually ANCAP and what is not ANCAP versus having nobody that believes in it.
The murder of William de Burgh led to civil war among Norman lords and the loss of English authority in the West. Early disasters such as so that's what you were describing: English invasions, Native Irish clans, descendants adopting Irish
Yeah, I
culture.
believe there were like various invasions throughout the history. Eventually, Ireland was taken over completely.
Yeah, I mean, so before that, there was a large Norman presence, and a civil war ensued. It doesn't specify the how stuff functioned socially. It was just saying that there was a cultural resurgence between 1350 and 1500. I mean, it doesn't really specify anything. I'm just gonna say describe the Gaelic resurgence as a period when Native Irish culture background collapse of Norman power, the Black Death, Bruce invasion. There's a famine, cultural revival. The English crown only had symbolic presence. The late period Tudor reconquest, when England would attempt full control. I don't know.
Well, anyways,
To
could
me,
you
it
you
just
mind
feels like
researching this another time and then coming back to us because
Yeah,
I want to talk
yeah.
about something else, honestly.
All right, yeah, sure.
No, I was just bringing that up and I don't know like a super large amount. That's just what I know about how law functioned in during that
I
time.
mean, so
period.
it's just an example of
Ireland.
like how things that the state does can be privatized, and it doesn't always necessarily lead to disaster.
I mean, I can't really say for sure that happened.
And these
'cause I
people
just
weren't
don't
even,
really-
and those people weren't even ANCAPs, and it worked for them. So imagine if
I
we had
can't-
ANCAPs that would support it and that
I
actually
can't
believed in it.
specifically say whether it worked or didn't. It just seemed like
Yeah, I mean, it worked for a while.
I don't know. It seemed like just a cultural revolution. I don't have any information on it, so I can't comment.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well,
But
the entire point of that example though is to show that in the natural state of humanity, ANCAP can work, right? That's the biggest argument that is being used. We're not saying that society is the exact example of what we want, nor that it holds all the parameters, right, of what ANCAP society would be nowadays. But at least it explains the natural state, right? And also, it also starts in, and that's why we, then start talking about different concepts and different principles that we then hold that are definitely different from that society, right? But at the end of the day, it's just talking about the natural state of humanity. That it works when it comes to just privatizing everything and not necessarily having a state holding this monopoly against the people.
Well, I'm not saying that it was, this is a pure example of anarcho-capitalism. I'm just saying I can't find any information on whether it was peaceful or whether there was a certain amount of violence. All it just seems to me is that it was just a cultural revolution or a cultural revival, and there's no real. I just can't find anything that specifies.
well, there are other examples of things that were pretty close to what we believe. The thing is, again, like what Dylan was saying, and to reiterate, like basically a lot of these examples that we give are just situations in which the state are examples of how the functions of the state could be privatized and how they were able to function, and they didn't just lead to automatic chaos as people would automatically assume. So yeah.
I mean, it seems to me like they eventually resulted in brutal rebellion. So,
Well, just because a country eventually failed does not mean that the
rebelling
system
against who?
is automatically bad.
well,
So, for instance,
when I mean
democracies have
rebellion-
failed. Democracies have risen and fallen. Feudalist lords have risen and fallen. Does that mean all feudalism is a flawed? You know what I'm saying? From your
Well,
perspective?
I don't think any specific political system is completely foolproof. I don't subscribe to any specific political aspiration.
Well, I'm
Uh,
not saying that ANCAP is 100% foolproof. Like, oh my god, I can't think of any situation where it would fail. Like, yeah, obviously, I'm sure you could think of a situation where, you know, maybe it could possibly not work, right? But I would argue that it would be more likely to work than not work if we had
And
the right conditions.
And then I remember joining the call, and you were saying something about the fact that, in the society, it'd be hard to convince a lot of people of ANCAP. And then what would happen if we had different ANCAP groups? I mean, that's going to happen. You know why? Because there are different branches of anarchism, and we have no problem if there is a group of anarchism, for example, anarcho-communists who want to live in an ANCOM society. That's fine. But you're not going to force me to join your society, right? The entire point at the end of the day is you remove the state. All in anarcho branches will agree that they're anti-state, right? Now, whether the traditional anarchists will agree with the ANCAPs about accepting capitalism into their system, that's a separate issue. But if people want to create their own society that doesn't have capitalism and it focuses on the working class, yeah, go ahead. Go to the middle of nowhere or the same thing and create your ANCOM society. Just that people can choose which ones they can join and which ones they can't, right?
Yeah,
It's
assuming
just up
nobody's
to them.
violating anyone's rights, you know, assuming nobody's forcing anyone into it, right? You know, we don't have any problem with people arranging themselves in different ways. Like, I mean, they're like, for instance, like Amish people. Like, I don't agree with everything that they do, right? But they're not, as far as I can tell, they're not like forcing anyone into their land or making anybody believe what they believe. They kind of just follow certain guidelines and rules that, you know, they believe in.
And then there's not really a problem with that, because if the argument is going to be that because there's different groups or even within ANCAP there's different groups that it's gonna have a fail or have a problem, I feel like that critique would be more strongly applicable to democracy than it would be to ANCAP, because at least with ANCAP the big concepts would be agreed upon of anti-state and for capitalism. If you're an ANCAP, the difference between the ANCAP world is maybe the applicableness of those things to that society, and also maybe the application of the non-aggression principle to certain situations. But at the end of the day, that depends on how that society is going to work, right? But most of the time it's going to work through the same way because the principles are agreed upon. But in a democracy where you have many groups that are drastically different, right? Most people will argue toe to nail to toe that a society with democracy is going to work, even though it is much more complicated and has much more extreme groups within it. That I would critique and say that it fails because of that, and that it doesn't represent the whole nation or its people because of that fact that there are so many groups and there's not agreed upon principles.
when I mean it doesn't work, or when I mean it fails, I mean it could potentially erupt in large-scale violence and civil war. And the reason why we don't have that, well, it could happen, of course, anything could happen, but the reason why that's uncommon in, first world, I can't say pure democracies, because the United States isn't a pure democracy, but first world democracies, is because there's a mediating force between multiple extreme ideologies that prevents them to varying degrees from eventually going in and killing each other. And over these, oh, well, my idea is pure, or my idea is pure, you guys are wrong, let's go fight each other over who is right. That's my point. The reason why we have democracy is because the people are able to choose which governing system works, and a constitution creates barriers in which the people can choose it.
The problem is with my problem with
them.
democracy is like, it's like, oh well, you can vote to take this percentage of money from me, but it's just like, okay, well, let's say the state were to be like, hey, and they vote hey, let's strip you down butt naked and literally steal all your wealth, you know, and then give it to some like a bunch of poor people. You know what I mean? Like, would that be okay?
Are you saying that the government does that now?
No, I'm asking like hypothetically if they did
I
something like
mean,
that, would that be okay? I mean, they do it a little bit, but
they
To an
kind of
extent, I would agree
do.
with the example. Yeah.
huh?
So you're saying that they do now?
A little bit, but
Okay,
not
so
fully.
They don't fully
I
strip
mean-
you down.
They don't fully strip you down,
okay,
but they do a little
so
bit.
back to Maraude's argument, the government uses these funds to, pay for, on a very micro level, more roads. They pay for, government employees to ensure that people are acting within compliance to
Sorry.
standards.
It's just
Um,
that's just not true though. We can see that.
So they
though.
don't maintain compliance or enforce compliance.
No. They definitely maintain. No. They definitely maintain those things. But at the end of the day, the majority of what they use it on is things that people do. It does not benefit people in that way. Nor that
Social
it covers-
security.
Social
Okay.
security
That's
theft.
Wait. Okay. First of all, like I said, if you're gonna go down the road, you're gonna see examples within the amount of money that is being used by the government on things that people would probably not agree on, or things that wouldn't fall upon that type of compliance, or the fact that it fixes roads. That stuff is such a small thing. If you're gonna consider Medicare or Social Security, and we're gonna disagree there because we don't think that is necessary, nor does that provide the basic. Like the basics that people are want to submit to when it comes to that contract with the government. Now, going back a little bit, first of all, even though you've mentioned this about the fact that democracies and this and the Constitution, even right now in the world's freest country, supposedly, where democracy rules when in reality it's not really democracy, it's a republic, right? It's a republic, right?
I don't see the difference, but
There's a huge difference, right? Because if you're comparing a democracy like ancient
Republic's a type
Greek
of democracy.
Athens, right, compared to like the United States, there's a huge difference in a representative democracy versus a democracy. There's also
I agree,
great
but
difference.
functionally speaking, it's different. I mean, the same.
There is. Do you think there's a difference between direct democracy and a representative democracy?
I mean, there's different forms of democracy and different forms of republic, but when people
Correct.
colloquially talk about them, they're pretty much the same.
Not necessarily.
And for the purpose of the conversation, it is the same.
But it's not the same. Historically speaking.
Yeah, it's historically, if we go into different schools of thought, there's technically differences.
I just gave you an example. I'm going to ask my question again. Do you think the current United States Republic is the same as ancient Greek Athens when it came to
It's not the same, but again, I'm speaking colloquially and for the sake of the conversation. People generally talk as see republic and democracy the same, and when people get into the nitty gritty of it, it's like, come on,
I'm not gonna go down this road. Either way, it's not for me. I study both, and I think that it's not. You can't really tell them it is. For the sake of the conversation, it's a really big thing to talk about when you're talking about political thought, and you're just going to smash in one branch and just smash it together. That's not fair. And you gotta talk about its differences. But in terms of democracy, people are criticizing this current representative democracy and saying that it's failing, that its constitution is failing, because they get an outcome that they don't want from it, right? All that we're trying to talk about is the fact that even representative democracies can lead to that potential violence that you're talking about when it comes to Ancaps, right? We're seeing it today within the United States. Look at all the political violence that is being ensued because of its democracy supposedly failing, right? We've had major political activists attacked, killed, assassinated, people scared away from the country, right? I have a professor that was literally given death threats and had to leave the country. I'm literally taking a class with him right now, and this all happened within us, and it was all because I wanted to learn about his anarchism and his traditional anarchism and his things with Antifa. But at the end of the day, he was a professor, and he was pushed away to Spain, right? There's a lot of other things, right? And that's just an example of things that is currently happening that you're critiquing of us, but is really happening within the traditional democracy. This isn't happening in a third world country. This is happening in the United States of America.
Okay. I do recognize the difference between, examples of political violence, which, by the way, I don't think any socio-political, what you call it, system could potentially prevent that type of stuff. Like, crime is going to happen anywhere under any circumstances. However, I can make a distinction between, and I'm going to throw another trope in here, political pundits or speakers getting harassed and Somalia. Something that would happen in like a country like Somalia or a situation like that. It's two completely different situations. What I'm talking about when I refer to violence in Ancapistan is almost clannish violence between private organizations, groups of private individuals, and semi-governmental private organizations. You know what I'm trying to say? So I don't think it's necessarily the same. It's two completely different things. And the point of the state is to try to minimize that type of stuff from happening as much as possible. So
but you don't. I don't think the objective of a state is necessarily to prevent violence between neighbor and neighbor. But I do disagree with your characterization, because think about it like this: just because a state exists, people don't just not attack their neighbor or attack a certain thing or promote violence, right? They usually do this because they have morals and they have values, and they usually see the killing of another person or the harming of another person as bad, right? So I don't think that in an Ancapistan society, especially now with our advanced like thought and stuff, you would just see a bunch of Neanderthals just shooting each other and being violent against each other and stealing shit from each other, especially when people are de-incentivized from doing that based on the fact that, now if you violate someone's property, you have the ability to defend it without the state characterizing what you can do and what you can't do, or depending on the state for your safety, right? That's all we're saying. And I don't think it's that crazy to say, because nowadays people feel like they're limited by the government in the sense of protecting themselves because of the fact that the state has so much involvement into what we characterize as self-defense and what can a person do to defend themselves, or can people even have guns, right? And what we're saying is that it would be totally fine if we just had an Ancapistan. So I don't understand where this massed rebellion or massed violence would be in Ancapistan. A better example of what would be like a critique of like this like mass like violence would be maybe if like you had two huge societies going at each other, like an ANCOM or an ANCAP society, or maybe even if there was another foreign power that was still like there and wanted to colonize or invade a certain part of the United States. If it was ANCAP, that would be a better example of a violence, but it wouldn't be a rebellion within inside, or that it would be a revolution against like people, but it would be between those. But there's still some argument against those things. The foreign power ones is a little harder to argue against, in my opinion, right? Because that's always the thing that I kind of disagree with. But in terms of like the societies, even if they're anarchist and they disagree, ANCOM and ANCAP, as long as they're not a state, they're not really up for attacking them or just demolishing them. They're okay with that. I bet you if you ask an anarcho-communist, hey, if you have your society in New York and we have our society in Virginia, they're going to be like, yeah, let's fucking do it. And they would go against the state. And boom, there you go. It's not it's not that hard in terms of...
We're going to win. We have guns and we will win.
That's my point. Like, violence typically isn't just an isolated incident. Violence usually starts, it's cancerous. It has a initial reasoning behind it. Then somebody decides to take it to the next level, and then somebody else takes it to an even further level in response to that, and it results in a chain reaction. The reason why I rejected anarcho-capitalism when I initially was an anarcho-capitalist is because private companies could easily take on the role of a state and say, I don't know, you guys probably know about Hoppianism, but say a covenant society suddenly becomes well, it originally starts off as a covenant society, and it eventually decides to be like, hey, we are a state now. We're gonna take on the functions of a state, and there's nothing legally stopping them from doing that. The reason why we have states is so that there's at least a state that we have currently in the United States is to create a sense of checks and balances, to hear each side out and to make the most rational decision through a legal process that doesn't just involve one person in order to attempt to make the most rational decision.
I think though you might be using the wrong definition of a state. I feel like you're using state at the political definition, whereas that's not where we're using it. Right. So when we're talking about not having a state or that things can't be a state, there's a specific definition of what we mean by that. Now, can private corporation act as some type of governmental authority or have some type of authority, or even people decide to exist within those authorities and apply and consent to them? Yeah. And can people politically define that as a state? Yeah. But is it defined as a state that has a monopoly of violence on people and forces you into a contract that you do not want to consent to? No, that's the entire point. Now, if private corporations, or there is an example of a certain group of people that decide to then become a state, if within their society they consented to it, I wouldn't see the biggest problem with it, because at least they're consenting to it. But if their children are born and then they don't consent to it and then they decide to revolt against them, there's not a problem with that. And also, if that then private corporation or that specific covenant or this specific group then decides to maybe invade other Ancaps land, or another person's land, or this and that, we would probably defend that person. We would probably not want that to happen, because as a neighbor, if I saw my neighbor get attacked by some person that act like a state and they just came in and took his land, I probably want to prevent that happening to my land, so I would go defend him and probably organize people around me to try and go.
Also,
That's the
Ancaps,
issue.
we could have guns. We have guns, so we could use guerrilla warfare.
Okay, I don't have an issue with that, but the point is, people don't want to deal with all that. That's no different than Yemen or something.
Well, the thing is, the fact that we could use guerrilla warfare can just because guerrilla warfare was used against the United States military, the biggest military in the world.
Okay, sure.
And they were able to basically stop them from fully capturing a whole area, for a whole bunch of areas. For instance, Afghanistan, as soon as they left, those terrorists just went right back in and took it back over. And the reason why, even though they don't even have nearly as close to advanced technologies as we do. I mean, they were attacking us with pickup trucks and AK-47s, well, in the United States, and they were able to fend them off. I don't see how that can't also be applied to, say, an Ancapistan of people who believe very strongly, who are very against the state, who could then group together and then fend off one rogue private security agency that decides to invade.
Okay, sure. Let's assume that works. I personally don't think that it's the truth in every single situation. As somebody who knows a lot of people with military backgrounds, I mean, it could hypothetically work. But my point, that's not the point. My point is the state. The whole purpose of the state is to, or at least what we have now, is to become a central arbiter of issues like this, so that it doesn't have to go to that level where we have clan wars and stuff.
It would be less likely to happen in Ancapistan because it would be run by
clan
private
wars?
companies. Yes.
Again, let's go back to what I just said. You're again, conflating what the definition of a state is. We do not have a problem with that part of a state. We have a problem what we define as a state becoming like a mafia or a criminal organization against people and having that monopoly against them and just forcing them into things that they do not want to do, right? And the fact that people can't remove themselves from that because they just can't. That's
and
the
you can-
problem that we have.
And
So
you can have
it's
people
not
pay you
about-
without forcing them. Like, for instance, if you have somebody on your land and you charge them rent, you don't need to force them to pay you. You could just be like, "Hey, if you don't like to stay on my, if you don't want to pay me, then get off my land." And that's incentive for them
What
to pay you.
happens when we have what we have now, where a large conglomerate of private equity firms decide to buy up all the land because they find it to be more
It would be
cost
impossible.
effective.
That's
So
not
there's no
feasible.
private equity firms in Ancaps there.
It would
Or
no.
that
What
can
I would say,
operate.
I'd said it would be impossible for them to buy up all the land because as they buy up,
What?
as people see that they're buying up a bunch of land, the remaining land will then become more and more and more expensive because they're as you buy up more of that good, the demand gets higher, and as that then makes it more expensive. So by the time you try to buy up more, you eventually run out of money.
What? So why haven't any private equity firms run out of money? Wait, are you talking about the land becomes inaccessible
For
to
one,
those private
I don't know
equity
any
firms?
private equity firm that owns all the land.
Well, I'm not saying they own every single acre of land in the United States, but they own the majority of, or
That's not
a
true.
huge percent. So what? That's
The-
why we have
the
a
state
housing
owns,
issue.
The state owns the majority of the land.
Residential land, residential property.
I'm talking about land in
Large
general.
investment firms do not own that much of the
Yeah,
housing
I'm
market.
talking about land in
If you
general.
look at the numbers, they own a very, very small amount relatively.
Yeah, the state is the
You're-
one
you're
that owns
referring-
most of
you're
the land.
referring- You're
What
referring
is-
you're referring to the private equity firms now moving into like single residential homes. At the end of the day, that's an example of how much of the representative democracy has failed us, and how much that
What does that have
wouldn't
to do with
happen under,
democracy?
because it's the entire fact that the mover, the state, the mafia, the criminal organization is allowing those private equity firms to do that. Right now, I don't think that we should still have a state and then just have it fixed. We should just remove everything and then fix it based on our principles. That's all I'm saying. I don't think is that crazy to say, especially when people in a representative democracy would agree with me that private equity firms buying single resident homes are a bad thing. But at the end of the day, they're not dictating the price of houses. How the housing market right now has other factors as well that are bigger, like interest rates. Interest rates by the Federal Reserve are much, much more impactful than the amount of housing that BlackRock or Vanguard owns.
Yeah, the state. If you're worried about people owning a whole bunch of land, the state owns like way more land than any individual private company does, or even Bill Gates.
Well, I'm not 100%
Remember,
in defense of the state in specifically. I'm just talking about essential arbiter that isn't beholden to market forces.
So it's okay when they own all the land. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
By the
I
way,
don't really
just
care who-
remember that the government does not own just what is considered federal land. They own everything. Remember,
Well, I understand that.
there is no such thing as your fully owned private land, even though by those private equity firms. Every piece of land, every acre, every island, everything under the United States is taxed, and people
Yeah, I
are
know that.
not given their titles. These titles, unless they're allodial titles, which are illegal and do not exist. What a surprise. They are not fully private. Every single 100% of the land is still owned by the government, especially if they use the legal known concept of eminent domain. Right?
Yeah.
That
I
is the
agree.
biggest problem.
I agree. I have no issue, and I have no issue with that.
You don't have
You
a
don't
problem
have-
with eminent
You
domain.
you don't have a problem if eminent domain is used on your house tomorrow, just because the government
Oh,
feels like it. You pissed off some guy in the federal government, and now he wants to take your fucking land. What happens?
Well, if it's under that situation, under those terms, then technically I could fight it. But if it's for what eminent
assuming
domain
that
is
you win.
usually used for, then
Assuming you win the toughest case in
the
the
government can, on a mass, from the perspective of society and the good of society, I think the government should be able to take land for to build more roads or to build quote unquote research centers. I don't think it's good in every single sense because it has been used in predatory ways.
Tax money on undeveloped
But-
land, correct? You know how much land has been considered developed for so long? In my state of Jersey, the government has used eminent domain to take land and then says it's going to develop housing and other things on it. Those
Yeah, and they
housing
leave it.
units
Well, I'm
haven't
aware because
been
I'm
built
from
for over
Georgia.
15 years. Then you would know how serious this is. And there goes all that tax money.
Well,
just
that's
going
bad
straight
You gotta
government.
to
watch some
private-
John Stossel, bro.
Yeah, but if you ask people within Jersey, they're happy about the fact that their kids go to good schools and they go to good roads, even though they pay high amounts of property taxes. I mean, people are pretty content with the government in Jersey. I mean, very few of them are saying, that Phil Murphy is horrible. And if they are, they're just saying that to say that because they're not against anything that he did, and they're not against anything that the state did in general, right? But the point of the matter is, there goes the precious tax dollars, and there it goes to build up those firms, those construction firms, and those equity firms that hold that land based on the government's monopoly on us, based on their ability to use eminent domain. That's how you buff up the corporations, and then you say, well, what happens if that corporation goes into Ancapistan? You wouldn't have a state to facilitate their entry into it.
Yeah.
The
Also,
entire
they
point of
sometimes
why
they
these
give it to private
corporations
companies too.
exist. The entire point is private corporations have a huge say in our government. They have a huge say in our government as much as people don't want to do it. But not in the sense of lobbying, but in the sense of the ability that it has to use politicians to get what they want, right? In the sense of money, favors, land, the access to land, everything. That's what private corporations are doing now with politicians within this representative democracy. So that in that aspect, most people, if they're explained that, which they don't understand, they will agree and say, hey, that's probably bad. That's a good critique of the state. That's a good critique because that's what the state is doing. It's not hiding it. It's in plain view, but people are not alluded to it because it's not at the forefront of political thought. Right now, at the forefront of political thought is the other, it's either going straight to socialism or it's going straight now to authoritarian fascism based on the United States.
I agree, and I think that would be an example of bad government, not necessarily specific bad government, not critique of government, the concept of government.
Well, I mean,
And,
it is a bit of a critique of the
reason-
concept of government.
I mean, it could be, but that specific example would be a critique of bad government, and that the government should be
Well,
changed.
all governments act this way.
I mean, currently, yes, but I mean, I don't see, I could picture a world where we could simply change the way that government is acting or behaving, so that it doesn't behave in that specific way. Like, I don't think that's a critique of the government of New Jersey, not the concept of government in general.
No, it is a concept because that concept can then be seen in all 50 states and then in the federal government and then all local governments as well. It's not a critique of just the New Jersey government, right? I'm just using a very good example because I know a lot about New Jersey politics, right? But I'm just saying that same example is having across the thing, and you can see probably better examples in other states than in New Jersey. I'm just showing you an example of how the state, right, not only a state within the state, right, in this case, right, is using its tax money to fund private corporations, but there's also examples of bigger ones, right? Like, we haven't gone into, what about military contractors, right? What about these huge data centers being built by these huge technology companies on the PGM connection, right? That is raising everyone's electric bill, right? In the state of New Jersey and Pennsylvania and New York and a huge area, right? And who has to take the bill is the people, and the government's allowing them to do that. Both the federal, right? Even though it's saying it's doing something and it's not doing anything, but it affects multiple states and they haven't done nothing. the state governments, and then local governance of where these data centers are being built. There is an example of the precious government that we're talking about, the state using its means to do things that are bad to the people, and most people don't know. Most people are arguing that their bills are super up, right? And they don't know why, but then when you start looking at it, it's because the government continuously uses its power for bad, right? And all we're saying is that it shouldn't happen anymore, and we have to do something against it. There's not an example here where it's not like we're saying like there aren't good things that the government does, but it does very few good things. It probably did a lot of good things at the start when it became a government, right, or a state. But right now, it's not doing much. You know why? Because most people consented to being a state at the beginning, but now most people don't. I see the possibility of a lot of people not consenting to it and
I don't
wanting
consent.
to go, or they don't even know the fact that they can just say that they don't consent. They just accept the norm of being in a state.
I don't consent.
See, I'm not a 100% statist. I don't subscribe to any political system, but again, that's a fundamental problem that can be changed within government and potentially through government.
You can't. You can't. Not if
Possibly,
concepts like
but then
eminent.
that's a share
Not
that we're
if
just
the
gonna have to
concepts
accept
of
that.
lobbying. Not
When you give
because
people,
you can't
when
not
you-
change the effects of eminent domain. It's written in law. You cannot change the power that the government has over the people when it comes to taxes, which is considered to be theft. And most people agree that it would be considered theft. Now, whether they consider it theft as the way that we consider it, that's a separate conversation. That's why we're trying to open up the conversation. But in terms of the effects of private firms and private corporations on it, you can see it across the board with many different countries that aren't even considered democratic, right? Countries that are more considered oligarchic than anything else, like Russia, for example, where it's ruled by private corporations, and how bad it does to the people, right? That's the example that we're saying. We're saying that in every state, these things are facilitated because of the fact that it's a state, because it holds that monopoly. That monopoly is extremely extensive, and it's there to benefit them and not us. That entity has become not of the people, but of of itself. It has become a cancer, right? The same way that you describe the political violence that can be ensued, right? It has become itself a cancer on society that cannot be removed because in itself justifies its strength against the people, right? But the people can definitely go up against it. But the problem is that state in itself, that cancer, is teaching them not to. It's teaching them that government is good. Classic political thought teaches that the government is good, that the state is good. It teaches that human naturally are bad and they cannot exist in a society not ruled by that state. Right? And if you dare God think that the state is bad, well, go to Spain like that professor did. Right? Like if you think that it's bad, you're a terrorist. That is what we have come to, right? This is an example of how the state fails to do what it's supposed to do. Right? It fails. There is no point of saying that, oh, well, I'm not a statist and I don't subscribe to a certain political thing, but if you can't accept that the fact that there are multiple states that all look the same in this aspect, and then not criticize the state for doing that, buddy, come on. And if you do, you're just an ANCAP.
Okay. The common denominator in that specific situation isn't the state itself. Well, it is to a certain extent, but the main common denominator are those companies and those firms that have essentially indirect control over those states. That's the common denominator.
The common denominator is that the corporations have control over the state?
Indirectly.
Okay, and that's what I'm arguing. And what's the point?
The point is, it's the problem of those private companies. Technically, they're private companies and not the state. No. Well, I'm not saying the state is absolved of all.
No, because if a state wants to, they would go against the private corporations, and the corporations can't do nothing. They don't hold power over. How are you going to tell me that the state? Wait. So you're telling me the state that holds all the land, that holds a monopoly on all the land in its country, they're not the problem. It's the private corporation that's giving a couple dollars to politicians. right?
I mean, it's
I mean,
not
they're the
just
one that pays the
for-
they're the ones that pay the state to do their bidding. It's not the other way around.
Exactly. It's not the other way around. This is the classic argument of just throwing everything on that privatizing and that the private things are bad, when in reality it's the government that's allowing these private corporations to keep getting fat and just getting fucking obese on money from the government. The reason why you have monopolies and these corporations and all that is based on the fact that the government is allowing to. Yeah, there probably is an example of like a grocery store in like the middle of nowhere that probably has a monopoly on things. But in terms of the grand scheme of what we consider to be monopolies, on why the Antitrust Act was created, right? All of that stuff is historically because the government, the state, allowed it to be. Right, and you cannot make me that argument that it's the fault of the private corporations and that they're the ones that are bad, because what, we're going to get rid of them and what happens, right? We did the antitrust law and what happens? Did more monopolies come after the fact? Yeah. Does the antitrust law fail at breaking up monopolies successfully? Yeah. And in the United States, what are the biggest monopolies? I don't know. Amazon comes to mind, right? A bunch of electric companies come into mind. A bunch of oil companies that still work together, even though they've been split up under the Antitrust Act from U.S. Big Oil, right? There's still so many companies that operate with a monopoly. Then you have Facebook, right, or Meta, right, which is now considered to be a monopoly of things, and then other huge monopolies that still exist within the United States. And that's not even talking about other countries, right? I don't understand why a distinction has to be made when you can clearly see that the private corporation is the one doing this. It doesn't matter if you want to change the common denominator. They both prove the same point, whether the common denominator is a state or that the private corporation is doing that. They prove that the state is allowing this to happen. They are the ultimate authority when it comes to this. A state defines itself like that. It's not a state if it's not the ultimate authority. Unless you're talking about some random group in the middle of fucking nowhere, right? That's just like not what we consider to be a state. Right, then this is all because a state is a state, not because a private corporation is a private corporation, because a private corporation is a vast and broad definition. It can mean a lot of things and can operate within a state, without a state thing, and this. You can just see that based on the historical like sense of what corporations used to be. But for example, what is the biggest corporation in history, right? It's the East Indies Company, correct? Right? What facilitated the growth of that company? The fact that it could recuperate money and get money from the government to push that empire's needs of trade across the world. That
where
was
did that
facilitated
government get the money from in order to give the
from the taxes that it taxes people.
Not necessarily.
And then the company itself sells shares in order for it to facilitate its travel over to the East Indies. That's how the East India Company works, right? There's still an aspect of that people bought into it, but the biggest mover was the fact that the British Empire, right, also facilitated this move and facilitated its grounding in that. And then when lands were taken from people, right, by the East Indies Company, right, what then happens is that the British then declare it to be British sovereign soil, right? For example, in British Raj, or in other examples across the world, right? That is my point. That was not facilitated by a private corporation, right? It was facilitated through the government's want to get that. Its want to get spice. Its want to get trade land. The want of the people to get those things. The want for tea. A lot of things. And then what happens? The private corporation gets created, even though in reality, that private corporation, as a historian, right, that private corporation looks more like a government agency than it does a private corporation, in the sense that it used British military, it used the British Navy, right, and then used British governors that were given power by the British. They had commissioned officers in that company by the king, right? You had all of that. So you see where I'm going with that? It's being facilitated by the state, by that empire. and just the means is the use, the actual like use of that is through private corporations.
Your overarching sorry, it's late. Your overarching argument is that it's mainly the state that is responsible for things such as
Yes.
eminent domain. Well, it directly enforces it, but there's no interest from private companies that are, in a sense, swaying the state's decision to
No,
do
no,
things such as waste taxpayer dollars on
trust
their
me,
own.
that happens. That's happening. But that's not a critique of the private corporations, because who lets that happen is the government. If the government didn't let that happen, the private corporations would not be interested in wasting their time with the government, right? If they didn't allow themselves to move in. The fact of the self is the government doesn't hold itself accountable, and it doesn't do anything to protect itself or protect its people. All it cares about is how much money is in my pocket, right? Either the individual itself or the government and the state itself. That's why I'm saying it's a cancer, right? The entire point is that it itself does not hold itself accountable, right? And then it allows this private equity just to come in and do what they want. That's not a critique on them, because yeah, no, I agree with you. There probably are proper corporations that look and say, well, if we could take advantage, let's do it. But if the government lets itself take advantage, don't come to me and say that the problem is the private corporations. The government that promised you that it was going to use your money, the taxes that you have paid responsibly, and that it says that it's going to protect you, give you security, give you this and give you that. Look, it's failing. It's failing. At least if you don't agree with ANCAP, you can tell me at least that the state in its
I never said that
monopoly
it
is
isn't.
failing.
I
It's
never
failing.
said that it wasn't. All I'm saying is that the government, at least the point is, and that is an example of government not operating in the way that it should be. Um, and in an ideal society, the people would have the ability to, change, or they have a voice in the government to be able to voice their opinions and make changes. When I was specifically referring to private equity buying up a large share of real estate in the country, not all private equity acquisitions of U.S. Residential, commercial, what have you, types of land are done through eminent domain, or the government taking land and essentially giving it to private equity firms. A lot of the times they wait for interest rates to fall low, or they wait for the market to, the timing of the market to be able to make the decision on when and where to make these purchases. And they're becoming a larger and larger share of U.S. property owners. And in a completely deregulated environment, such as Ancaps, there's nothing really stopping them from taking an even bigger share and potentially levying laws against the people who work on and use those lands. So, in a sense,
Ancapistan, if I was sitting on my porch of my farm, right, in the middle of Pennsylvania,
right?
Pennsylvania is a great place to live.
Shit. I don't know how much.
Is it better than South Jersey? Yes, it is.
Probably is. South Jersey is like Alabama, so you're right.
Where are you from, by the way? What part of Jersey?
I just moved to Virginia, but I'm originally from Somerset County.
I got you. I'm from Elizabeth, so
Union cool.
County. So as north greatness as you can get in terms of
I'm
cities.
from Florida, bro.
So
basically Jersey.
If I was living in the middle of buttfuck Pennsylvania, right?
Right.
And a private equity firm came on my land and said, "Hey, we want to buy your land." I say no. They just leave. Now, if the private equity firm shows up on my land and says, "We're going to take your land," if I then shoot them for trespassing on my land, and then I defend my land, right? That would be an example, right, of how within Ancapistan, right, private equity firms or private firms in general wouldn't have the ability to just be themselves a mover or a state and just take land from people, right? They can buy up the land that's available, but at the end of the day, it's not going to benefit them because the entire point of private equity firms that are currently buying up land is because we have a huge stock market that is also dependent on the government and its actions, and then on the actions of federal banking, right? And then that's why housing is being bought up, right? That's a big example, but people are still going to be able to buy land, and that is going to still happen, and people are still going to sell property to themselves, and some people might sell it to private equity firms, but private equity firms wouldn't have the grasp that they have on people today the same way that it does within the United States, because with state falling down, their grasp just goes away, and now they have to talk to the people. And remember, that entire monopoly of violence they don't have anymore. You're going to tell me that a private equity firm is going to spend billions and trillions of dollars on developing a military or even some type of force to go up against people? They're going to end up seeing it and they're going to be like, bro, this is going to cost a lot more money than just retiring and just leaving me the fuck away from this and just making something smaller, right? They're probably going to reform into different companies that work under that thing. So like a private equity fund would probably turn into more of like a bank, right? And they'd be like, well, if you want, you can, we're banking now, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. You wouldn't see examples of the private equity firm or other private corporations just coming in and saying, hello, me want your land, get the fuck off. You wouldn't have examples of that, no, because we don't have examples of that today without the state being there. Private equity gets the land through the state. The state has to be there. The guy with the clipboard and the hard hat, right? Who calls himself, hey, I'm from the government, right? The guy behind him with the bulldozer, that guy has no fucking control about what happens. He's just there because the state said, yeah, go, you, this all yours. And then the guy in the bulldozer is like, yeah, okay, we'll do whatever the fuck we want with this. Right? That's how the private equity firms work in terms of the government. So if the guy with the clipboard isn't there, and then there's a guy with a shotgun, yeah, let the bulldozer guy try to come at my house. Let's see how that would work, right?
It doesn't always work like that, and private equity firms don't always, go through the government and say, "Hey, eminent domain, this person's land." A lot of the times, private equity firms wait for certain points in the market, where say there's a recession, or say there's a I don't know, hike in or decrease in interest rates, and the average person, say you in this example, say, the ANCAP, the top Ancapistan companies decide, hey, let's increase the prices on this for this specific period of time, just because we're falling short this quarter or last quarter, and we got to recuperate our losses, something like that. Or it could just be something related to the stock market or anything that typically happens in the economy. What these private equity firms or even smaller individuals or real estate companies do is they wait for those periods where people are most desperate, where they're most likely to want to, not even want to, but have to sell their land out of material need. You're more likely to sell not even just your entire land, but stake in your land gradually when you're debating whether between your mortgage or home utility costs or those matters, and whether you're going to eat or whether you're going to have gas for your car or various insurance related costs, and then later sell shares or sell pieces of your property to these firms. Over time, what tends to happen is these firms accumulate a larger portfolio and more money through renting these pieces of lands out for either various commercial or residential needs. And, you end up with a situation where the majority of commercial or private residential land is owned by these companies, where these companies can essentially levy a terms of service, if you will, on its residents or the people who live on it, and essentially act as a de facto government where you essentially have modern day feudalism, which, in my opinion, is a form of dictatorship.
Because they have terms of service on the property that people then rent. I'm confused.
That they rent to, or the land that
That's
they
not a
own.
form.
They
That's
don't
not a
have the
form.
deeds.
That's not a form. That's not a form of being a state.
I mean,
If you own property, because then that what we would call the individual person that owns a house in New York City, and then says, "Hey, because I have a terms of service, I'm a dictatorship. I'm a state. I'm a." That doesn't really work with me. But
I
in
mean,
terms of what you were saying in terms of private equity, even though private equity might not use the state for everything, that just proves how private equity will exist, and probably it will exist fine within a privatized society, right? Because it's mostly it does its stuff privately. But at the end of the day, a lot of the reasons why it gets bumped up, right, is based on the involvement of the government and their ability to then get information, to then work out things in the stock market, right? This thing of where like private equity just grows because it grows through private means and not any type of information from the government, it's just not true, right? Because there's also like examples of how much these equity firms will move based on tips and things from the government and information from them in order to do things within the stock market, right? They're informed of, some of them might even be informed that interest rates will go down before interest rates are announced by the Federal Reserve, right? There's things like that, right? That definitely help them even within what we would consider a private sense, right? And that just shows how they would be able to do that within a privatized society. They just wouldn't be doing it to an extension. Now, in your sense of where they would abuse people's like statuses, yeah, that happens today. People that don't have like great like economics, they might be a bit targeted. But that usually doesn't you don't hear that happening in like large cities, right? Because that's where private equity firms are at, right? Private equity firms, what they want are either huge rental properties or undeveloped land. They don't want like single residential homes, even though they have ownership over them. But when you look at it, what are they trying to own? They're owning apartment buildings, right? They're looking for huge properties like that they can just make money, right, over time. Or undeveloped land where they can just collect money from the government, right? Where they think they can just, or they might even just develop it and then sell it again to the government, or they do this. That's also another thing. I don't know if you ever heard that. There's an example where they just buy undeveloped land, then they charge it whatever price they want, and then just say, hey, government, want to buy this, and the government buys it, even though, why would the government want to buy that? There's no reason. It's undeveloped land, and then it stays undeveloped. And then they then pay the same company or a different company, hey, you want to develop this land for me? And then they don't develop it for 15 years, right? And then they just make money off of that, right? And they make a huge amounts of money, right? It doesn't matter that it might be a small amount of this situation. The point is, the amount of money that they're making, it's a huge amount that no one would ever imagine that a company gets just for existing, basically, right? And that's what we're trying to say. And then in a sense of people's, and then you also mentioned something about people's utilities and whether they have to decide between that and food and this. Again, you wouldn't really have that in Kapistan because utilities aren't monopolized by the government, and they aren't monopolized by other big electric companies. They would probably either still exist, but people choose to do other things, and then their monopolies would probably split, and they would probably, be more centered in local communities. You would see examples of
what?
electric companies. Yeah, no, you probably wouldn't have the same control, right? Because people would be able to decide on their own means what they want to choose if they don't want to have electricity or not, right? You would see that, especially if they don't want to pay the price. If they don't want to pay the price and they're like, well, we can sacrifice and not be part of the power grid. The point of the matter is, if people decide not to be part of that power grid and they want to make their own power grid, for example, the private electric company can say, well, you're violating the thing. You can't do that, right? You're not doing that, and people can come together and they can make up corporations to make their own electric grid and be independent from the dependence of that. That's where we're putting the ability to do things in the hands of the people and not always depending on that representative democracy to just push it for you, for them to fix the problem, right? Because they created the problem in the first case and now they don't want to fix it. But they criticize it, that's for sure. Politicians will criticize it, but they won't fix it because it benefits them at the end of the day. If it benefits Jersey politicians and it benefits a lot of politicians in the Northeast, that PJM continues to do its work as it does and keeps throwing money at them. It just happens like that.
That's why we need to completely abolish the government.
So you brought up it. Utilities wouldn't be significant cost. I mean, I don't see that being the case because to
But
produce
they're
energy,
not a
it
mover
costs.
in the conversation that we're talking about the selling of property. They wouldn't be a mover. And not to say that there wouldn't be expensive utilities in Ancapistan. Probably at the beginning there would be, right? But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is, once you start seeing the private market move and fluctuate on its own, independently without it having a state, you will see that people. And also, you got to remember, some of those power lines are on people's land, and the only reason that people don't consider them their land is because the government says, "Yeah, no, this point was taken, and we're going to put power lines, and it's not part of your acres." Right? There are people in Pennsylvania, there's people in South Jersey, there's people everywhere where there are lines made on their land. If the government just goes away, and that land is technically my land, I have a deed that says it's mine. I have history in that piece of land. Everything ties that land to me. Just because there's a power line on it, you know what I go do? I go take that power line down. Now what? The electric company that a bunch of people are paying for electricity, they're not paying. They're like, hey, wait, where's our electricity? Now the electric company has to figure out ways to go around that and say, well, we need to power the people. If not, they're not going to pay for us. We're going to lose a huge amount of money. You're going to see examples like that. So those examples of those things happening, right? And those are we're talking about microeconomics. We're not talking about this in large scale. We're talking about very, very small scale, right? You're going to see examples of that happening, which then might cause people to make different corporations that might sustain cities on themselves. You probably wouldn't see the connection as big as the grid is in terms of PJM, where PJM covers if I show you right now what PJM covers, I don't know if you know what PJM is, right? But the interconnection of them covers PJM, right? Covers Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Virginia, West Virginia, parts of Kentucky, parts of Indiana, parts of Mississippi. Michigan, parts of Illinois. It has a lot of control, right? And that's not even looking at the bigger grids, right? Like the ISO out in the Midwest or the WPP out in the West Coast, right? Like this is what I'm talking about, is that these things would probably not be there once you had the privatization of people's means.
And that's a good thing because we should expect or want a centralization of access to power, or else you'll get a situation like to a minor degree like Texas, where their system is completely different than the rest. They're not connected to like a multi-state system in regards to their power or their infrastructure. So if something goes wrong, then they're completely on their own, and that's for like a.
New York's is also on its own. New York's ISO is also on its own. There's parts of it that are by PJM, but it is its own grid. And also California has mostly its own grid. Part of it is part of the WPP, but California has its own ISO. And they don't fail at the rate that the electric connection is in Texas. The reason is that because the electric grid in Texas is just very vulnerable to a lot of things. Right, that's not the fault of the fact that it's just a one state thing, right? But the point that I'm trying to make is whether or not everyone look, I love the fact that everyone gets access to electricity, but at the end of the day, if the sacrifice that we must make is allowing the government to do all these things or allow private corporations to do this, where they can just raise and then lower them based on whatever they fucking feel like it, especially when it comes to just allowing data centers to just come in and just raise the price on everyone. Yeah, no, I'm going to argue against that right to energy, for the sense of, yeah, no, I want to be able to afford living, and the government is doing me a wrong, and this private corporation is doing me a wrong, right? That's the entire point that I'm trying to make here. And I as much as you can try to find the workaround, right, about this, and trying to push it in with like certain like goods within this sense, yeah, no, there's still a problem with the state, man. Still a problem with the state. It doesn't facilitate good. It's not helping anyone. I know people in Jersey who
Taxation
are
is
paying on the
theft.
upwards $800 on their electric bill when they used to pay $300, just because of this PJM interconnection with making deals with the government and making deals with data centers that are then
How's
being
it going,
also, those
guys?
deals are also being
Contention
facilitated by
whether
the
to
state
go
and local
SP
governments,
or
right? Making
AP
deals to then
drawback.
not say anything to their
You do-
people. And so now I'm living it with it, and as well in Jersey, where I gotta pay these ridiculous ass prices, right?
Then the point is to have certain checks and balances and give the people the opportunity to not necessarily vote for these issues. That's a conversation for a different day, but to at least vote for representatives who are going to change in an
They're
ideal
not gonna change it.
situation.
But they're not
And
going to change it. That's the entire point. Is
yeah,
that they're not
that's
going
the
to change
issue.
it. Yeah, they're not going to change
Currently,
it
that's the issue.
because the government doesn't hold itself accountable. It doesn't hold its politicians accountable. So why would we then say, yeah, you should then just work on voting for someone, right? When they are not going to hold themselves accountable. Nothing holds down the politician to do what they say they're going to do, right? It's just word of mouth, right? They just come out and they say that we're going to do this. I'm going to do this. For example, Mikey Sherrill, the current Democratic nominee for governor in Jersey, says that she's going to freeze utility bills on her first day in office, right?
We doubt.
Which I doubt. And even if she does, what does that change? What does that help us do? It doesn't do anything, right? At least I can give
Well,
props
I
to
can tell you what
Pennsylvania's.
that'll do.
I can tell. I give you some props to Governor of Pennsylvania. He said he's going to leave the grid. Like that. That at least I can say, as a citizen, I'd be like, I would agree more with that. At least I can see some example of the government doing some good and saying I don't want to be part of this monopoly that it's on the thing. But at the end of the day, the government facilitated it in the first place. It continues to facilitate it. It's going to continue to facilitate it no matter how many politicians you vote for. It's like it's the same thing with people that are like communists or socialists and talking about like independent politicians. The government is going to continue doing what it does best, and people are not going to be able to come in with a different political thought just because they have different political thought. If that would happen, you would see a lot more examples of independent politicians, which if you look at it, the United States and its Congress, you don't see that. There's literally, I think, only one person that is considered to be independent to the
All
full
right, guys.
extent, and he's not even me.
I'm gonna head
So
to
it's
bed
hard.
because I'm getting pretty tired. So I hope you guys
Good
had
night,
fun,
boss.
and I'll see you guys next time.
It's nice seeing you again, Synthis.
Yeah, you too,
All right, good
man.
night, boss.
It was good talking to y'all. And you too,
Good talking to you.
fan. How do you say your name?
Fang is a door.
Thank Isadora. Yeah,
Fang
it was nice meeting you,
Yeah.
man.
Of course, man.
All right, everybody, have a good night. I'll see y'all tomorrow, or another time I debate, or whatever. See.